start this afternoon's business with the Christmas chair of finding the Connaught Harbour St Mary for the phone going off, I believe, immediately before the adjournment. There was an extremely large note in front of me saying I had to impose a fine on the Constable of St Mary.
So is it a regressive fine, or?
I don't know enough about the Connaught Harbour's means to be able to say. Very well. Yes, we now continue with the debate on the government plan, and the next amendment for the Assembly to consider is the first amendment lodged by Deputy Balash. And I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph E. After the words Article 9(2)b of the law, insert the words, except that in summary table 3, the transfers in the last two rows of the table shall be replaced as follows. Page 2, paragraph H. After the words Appendix 2, summary tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, insert the words, except that in summary table 5.1, the figures in the columns expenditure and headed expenditure for Treasury and Exchequer shall each be increased by £20 million in 2024, so as to reinstate the state's grant to the Social Security Fund in full.
Sir, I think it is rather disappointing that we are having this debate. I truly believed that the government had accepted that social security funds should no longer be plundered for other purposes. Why did I think that? There are two reasons. First, the Minister for Social Security had said in the February debate, the state's grant will be returned to its full value of some £82 million in 2024. No ifs, no buts. The state's grant will be returned to its full value in 2024. And the second reason is that the Treasury Minister effectively said the same thing. He said that my words had struck a chord with him, and he agreed that ministers had not quite weaned themselves off this kind of process. But then he went on, in that government plan for 2024, ministers have said, no, the transfer from taxpayers to the Minister for Social Security will take place, and that is just over £80 million. So I am not going to make a Mark Antony speech about honourable men, but I just do not understand how ministers can be so brazen and how indeed they can be supported by the Council of Ministers. I understand the difficulties of balancing the books. I understand the reluctance to take money out of the strategic reserve. But a commitment was given. The state's grant will be returned to its full value in 2024. It is regrettable that a commitment of that kind can now be so casually ignored and not even thought worthy of mention in the Minister's comments paper. Not a word. Perhaps it is because they know that there is no justification for saying one thing and doing another. I think this brings the Assembly into disrepute. We rely upon one another to say it as it is and not to mislead each other with undertakings given and then conveniently forgotten. The broken commitment is, in my view, a good enough reason in itself for supporting this amendment. But there is an even more important reason to vote for the amendment, and that is the principle which I set out in my report. That principle is that money in the Social Security Fund and Social Security Reserve Fund belongs to the island's pensioners and prospective pensioners, and not to the government or even the States Assembly. It should not be used directly or indirectly for collateral purposes. The Council of Ministers seems to advance two reasons for asserting that the social security money can be used in this way. The first is that no money is being taken out of the fund, it is just not being put in. On the last occasion, I described that argument as sophistry, specious or over subtle reasoning. Ministers didn't like the word, but that doesn't make it inappropriate. The states are under a legal obligation to pay a supplement into the Social Security Fund each year in order that it has enough money to pay pensions. It is about, just under, on this occasion, £80 million a year. It is the basis of the whole pension scheme. The states supplement the contributions of those who cannot afford to fund their own pensions. It is not a discretionary amount. There is a statutory formula to work out the sum which will, when added to the contributions made by employers and employees, enable pensions and other benefits to be paid. That is why, if this amendment fails, the states will be obliged to pass regulations to disapply the law. What is being proposed in the government plan is to reduce the statutory sum by £20 million in 2024 and again in 2025. That amount will not be paid in. But the consequence of that is that £20 million will have to be transferred out of the Social Security Reserve Fund into the Social Security Fund for each of those years so that pensions can be paid. However you twist it about, the reality is that money which the government is legally obliged to pay into the Social Security Fund is not to be paid in, and money is to be taken from the Social Security Reserve to compensate for that failure to pay in. You can claim that money is not being taken. I say that is sophistry, specious reasoning to try to disguise the amorality and impropriety of what is proposed. My amendment is very straightforward. Instead of taking money from the Social Security Reserve Fund to balance the books, the government will have to use the Strategic Reserve. And we come then to the government's second objection, which is that they don't like taking money out of the Strategic Reserve. Nor do I. But it is the lesser of two evils. At least the Strategic Reserve is states' money, which comes from taxpayers. The Social Security Reserve Fund comes from contributors, employers and employees who pay in to the fund to receive a pension at the end of the day, supplemented as I have explained. The fund belongs, as I have said, to pensioners and prospective pensioners. It should only be used for purposes for which the fund was established. If members allow this money to be taken out, there is really no reason why the process should not be repeated on other occasions. Why not take out £100 million to put in the climate fund? Perhaps that's a bridge too far, but then why is it all right to take money out to balance the books, but not all right to take money out to put in the climate fund? The truth is that neither is acceptable. The reason why such transfers are wrong is that the money doesn't belong to the states. It is a fund which gives security for the payment of people's pensions far into the future, and that future is far from certain. There may be a lot of money in the fund, but that is not a justification for taking it. That's the morality of the shoplifter at Marks and Spencer's who reasons to himself that the store can afford to lose these goods. It has much more money than he has. And then there are some weasel words at the end of the comments paper which imply that the fiscal policy panel might think this is acceptable. I quote, "The fiscal policy panel in their latest report restate the recommendation to grow the strategic reserve." But do they recommend doing so at the expense of pensioners' funds? Have they even been asked? Finally, sir, the government says that it doesn't matter that we are taking money from the Social Security Reserve Fund because it will all be given back in 2027. Really? If I were a betting man, I might take a punt on that. We have learned that ministers' expressions of intent cannot always be relied upon. But the fact that you intend to pay back borrowed money doesn't make the taking of it any more legitimate. In another capacity, I sentenced numerous individuals who had taken money from a bank or business who swore that they always intended to pay it back. It was still theft to take money which does not belong to you. Now, I don't suggest that the word theft is appropriate in these circumstances, but I would say that it is amoral, improper, and wrong to take pensioners' money from the reserve fund and to use it for purposes which have nothing to do with the payment of pensions. I move the amendment.
Is the amendment seconded? Any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. I will start, I think, by referring to the Deputy's comments about what was said in the Assembly last year. And I absolutely accept that commitments were made last year. I did say the state's grants would return to its full balance this year. And that was what I understood at the time, and I suspect that is what all the Council of Ministers understood at this time last year. However, things have changed. We are facing a very difficult year this year and next year for government, and hard decisions have to be made. And any suggestion that this proposal was made in any kind of cavalier, offhand manner is frankly incorrect. It's simply not correct. There were very long and difficult discussions about this, about what we should do, and there was no... The suggestion that we're playing fast and loose on this and that nobody really cared is very far from the truth. I would go on, however, sir, to say that I suggest the Deputy has misinterpreted the proposals for reinstating the state's grant, and I reject in the strongest terms any notion that the government is plundering the social security funds. I can only reiterate again that this government is not withdrawing money from the social security funds. It is, however, proposing to pay into the fund at levels which are affordable. 57 million in 2024, 69 million in 2025, 89 million pounds in 2026, and 130 million pounds in 2027. That's a total of 345 million of taxpayer revenues being paid into the social security funds over the next 4 years. That is entirely what the grant, I believe that is what the grant would have been had it been paid at normal rates over 24 and 25, and there is no loss to the fund. It is simply a somewhat deferred payment schedule. The Deputy also refers to the Consolidated Fund borrowing from the Social Security Fund. Sir, let me again make this clear. There are no funds being withdrawn from the social security funds in this government plan. We are in fact putting more money into the funds by reinstating the state grant over the 4-year period, albeit at a slightly lower level this year and next. What has changed since last year is that the recent actuarial reviews have been published, and those show that previous decisions of the Assembly have put the funds in a very strong position, and that fortifies us against part of the financial challenge we face with an ageing population. This is in spite of previous decisions of this Assembly to freeze or remove the state's grant as required by the wider financial position facing the island. For example, in supporting islanders through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I would just correct a couple of things that the Deputy said. The funds may well belong to pensioners, but they are not solely used to pay pensions. They also pay short-term incapacity allowance, long-term incapacity allowance, home carers allowance. So any one of us at any time who have paid contribution can claim a benefit from that fund where our contribution record merits it. Contributions don't just come from employees and employers. Over very many years, contributions have also come from taxpayers, and that is what we are doing this year by reinstating the state grant. As I've just said, £345 million of taxpayer money is going into this fund. So it's not just the individuals and employers who have contributed. Returning to the actuarial review, as at 31st December 2021, which is the date of their reports, shows that the net balance in social security funds, being the Social Security Reserve Fund and the Social Security Fund, remains at over £2 billion in today's value, and it will remain at that level until the 2050s, assuming net migration of 325 a year. A higher migration assumption of 700 people a year leads to an increase in the value of the funds over time. With no net migration, the fund is still above £2 billion by 2041, although it does decline during the 2040s. These long-term forecasts against a range of migration scenarios show the underlying strength of the social security scheme at its current contribution rate. The government seeks to reinstate the state's grant in a manner and at levels which we can afford for each year of the plan. Even with the challenges we face during this cost of living crisis, which we've heard a great deal about already this sitting, by the end of the plan, the fund is no worse off. We must ensure we live within our means, and this approach demonstrates fiscal prudence without impacting on the fund in the medium, let alone the long term. Sir, what the Deputy has proposed is a worse option. At a time when the Fiscal Policy Panel are telling us we should be growing the strategic reserve, he is seeking to withdraw money from it, at least temporarily, but much like the temporary deferral of the full grant. This is consciously taking money out of one of our pillars of fiscal stability rather than a slight delay in our savings for a fund that measures itself based on decades rather than years. Sir, with respect, the Deputy seems to have misunderstood the Government's plans to reinstate the state's grant, which will go ahead, and I encourage members to reject his amendment to pay for the state's grant at a level which is unaffordable whilst borrowing from the strategic reserve to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member? I beg your pardon, Deputy Barbara Ward. Yes, you did say before and I'd forgotten.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to support the Deputy of Sir Clement and thank him for bringing this amendment. I was intending actually to do the same, however, he beat me to it, so I need to be quicker next time, if there is a next time. On the 7th of February, early this year, I presented my speech, which opposed the Minister for Social Security proposition of 110. During that debate, the Treasury and the Social Security Ministers assured the Assembly that the money would be restored to the formula set down in the law. That's Article 9A, and it's quite explicit of how that is done. This assurance on the 7th of February, I am sure, I am making an assumption, gave members comfort, hence the support for the proposition, and which was agreed. So, sir, here we are, December 23, some 10 months later, enshrined in the government plan, and we have an about turn and a plan to withhold 20 million during 24 and a further 20 million 25 via the state's grant. I am aghast, sir, and so very disappointed. In my previous speech, based on my experience in the world of multi-billion-pound pension funds, I emphasised the extreme importance that funding streams into pension funds must not be tampered with and or be used as a go-to piggy bank. Thank you. In my last speech, sir, I exercised restraint, but what, in my view, is happening, sir, draws parallels with the famous Robert Maxwell case some 40 years ago, where money was diverted from the company pension fund to fund other unassociated areas of their group. And I make my apologies, sir. Since this was exposed in the UK government has introduced several laws preventing this type of situation happening, and they've put in place laws to specifically protect and ring-fence pension fund assets. But here we are, sir, holding back on an important funding stream to our pension fund, effectively behaving like unto Mr. Maxwell some 40 years ago. I believe that the pension fund is actually owed approximately £300 million due to the prior years of underfunding. That's from 2020 to the end of this year. That's £300 million. And I'm at a loss as to why the actuary didn't show this as a debt to the fund. We are again being asked to support that a further £40 million be withheld from the pension fund over the next 2 years, with these funds being diverted elsewhere without any clarity, openness and transparency, because that's what we're all signed up to do. May I suggest, as a way to pay for shortfalls, etc., that the money, as suggested by Deputy Ballanche, and that the money that is taken from the strategic fund is that it's repaid, because every February, March of each year, around that time when all the accounts are signed off, we hear, and I have been in this island 45 years, and every single year, sir, oh, we found another £20 million. Oh, we found another £40 million. Well, that money can go back into the strategic reserve, which will help the money that's going to be taken out. So there is a solution, not taking money out of a pension fund, but you take it out of the strategic, you use the surplus that is found in February and pay that back. I'm aware that the government wished to return the 40 million under funding in 2027, but who knows what state of our finances will be by then, unless the Treasury Minister can see into the future with guarantees. And if so, sir, I'd like the Minister to give me the winning UK lottery ticket numbers for 27, if he can see into the future and guarantee. But seriously, sir, it's very dangerous for us to continually borrow from the resources of future years, especially as there seems to be little consequence for failure to then uphold that promise. I will remind members again, sir, we are assured in February that Article 9A, which sets out that grant formula, would be returned to normal in 24. Well, today we can see, sir, that this is clearly not the case. Whilst I appreciate that pension matters are not everyone's cup of tea, when one talks about pensions, you can see people's eyes glaze over and one switches off. I apologise to members for being rather nerdy, but I do understand pensions, and we should all take pension provision very, very seriously, as a failure in this area can have far-reaching consequences for the economy and livelihood of islanders. Therefore, sir, please may I encourage members of the Assembly if they do not understand pensions and its funding streams, to then consider, please, very seriously supporting Deputy Balash's amendment for the good of us all. In doing so, this will send a clear message to the government that the assurances stated in February earlier this year must be honoured, as set out under Article 9A of the Social Security Law. Thank you, sir, and the Assembly for listening. Please support Sir Balash's amendment. Thank you.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I rise with some trepidation because some of my remarks sometimes are not welcome, but I feel that I ought to rise and say that that the deputy has used the deputy in advancing this, Deputy Balash in advancing his amendment, has used some very colourful language. I know that there is a history of colourful languages in the use of the Social Security Fund. When it was first brought in, coffins were used by way of being a death knell to the end of employers not being able to fund it. He spoke of no justification. He spoke of commitments being broken and principles. So I'm actually looking at the law, and I'm looking at the actuarial review provision under Article 32, which the Minister has spoken about. And Article 32(3) of that law, it says, after completing the review, the actuary report shall be the actuary shall report to the Minister on the financial condition of the Social Security Fund and the adequacy or otherwise of the contributions payable under this law to support the benefits payable thereunder, having regard to its liabilities under the law. So the facts are, the actuarial report, which was not available last year, has now been advanced to the Minister independently and shows that the spirit of that very important contribution fund that has got three contributors into it: employees, employers and taxpayers. And that shows that the fund, because of sensible decisions of the past, is in a very good state. In fact, it is a remarkable fund, because I don't think there is an alternative fund anywhere that is as good as Jersey's. And so pensioners have got the knowledge that even with, as the Social Security Minister said, the future ageing society, even with those challenges ahead, the fund can meet its pension obligations in a very certain way, in a very secure way, because there has been no raiding of the Social Security Fund. There has been no, lest the Treasury Minister tries to interfere into the Social Security sustainability of the fund. They can't. The current Treasury Minister was a Social Security Minister in previous governments, and woe betide a Treasury Minister that tries to tinker with the fundamental principles that Article 32 requires us to abide by, or requires the Minister to say. If the actuarial review would have said the fund is not in a good state, and to Deputy Ward, who I completely understand, Deputy Barbara Ward and her arguments about clear messages to pensioners. Our fund pays pensions at a higher rate than most other jurisdictions, and it increases at a higher rate. If I'm not mistaken, I recall that it is a measure higher than that of inflation. It's an earnings calculation, as I recall. Our fund is better than anywhere else in the world. And that's because it hasn't been played with in other places. What is and must be acceptable is a medium-term view. And I suppose the only regret I have in the debate today, sir, is that we're not actually able to have a 3-year budget which can guarantee things. The last government threw away the fact that we should have 3-year budgets with guaranteed amounts to be put forward. The fund is in a good state, and it is not the lesser of two evils, I would advance to Deputy Balash. The fund is currently in a good position. It's going to get the funding that is required under the law. If the amendment is defeated, then legal arrangements will enact that properly. And the fund is in a good position that does not require this Assembly to take money from the strategic reserve, which is there for a rainy day, and transfer it into the Social Security Fund this year because it is in a very healthy state. We're dealing with long-term issues. The Social Security Fund is a long-term fund. It is a pay-as-you-go, but with a balance in hand, and a very significant balance in hand, paid for largely by taxpayers, significant amounts from taxpayers, in addition to employees and employers, and that means that fund is in a good and healthy state. And so why are we being asked to take for a legal principle that I don't think is correct based upon my interpretation of what the legal provisions are? Why are we being asked to take money from the strategic reserve that we've been told by our economic experts, the FPP, should be maintained? I don't know whether the deputy attended the FPP panel when they came to advise members about what we should do. I think that they were absolutely clear that we should prepare for the rainy day of the general economic situation of Jersey, but we do not have an issue in respect of the universal pension provision that this, amongst other things, and that it's difficult to explain all the provisions of the Social Security law, because as the Minister has said, it's not just about pensions, it's about a whole load of other contributions, contributory benefits. And so I'm afraid to say that the principle that I have is that the fund is in very good order. It's perfectly appropriate to defer a payment into it because the pensioners don't need to worry at all because the fund is in such good state. And we should take the principle of good economic management and good financial management and make decisions accordingly. When the facts change, I change my mind. And the facts are that the actuarial report is better than expected, and therefore the payments due from taxpayers can be deferred for 2 or 3 years. It's not like a thief in Marks and Spencer's or whatever store that is taking money. The States is not that, and there is no such accusation that could be made. There is a principle of good economic management. We've asked taxpayers to continue to pay the supplementation grant when it wasn't required, but we continue to pay it. The Minister has given a continued commitment to pay it, even when the economic condition of the island has made it difficult. And this year we have to have a year-to-year, unfortunately not a 3-year budget, and we have to basically defer that payment in, which the Minister has been quite clear is going to be paid, but at a later date. I would suggest that that is not borrowing, that is a sensible deferral of money's not been taken from the fund. It's going to be paid in at the right time to match the expenditure of pensions. In fact, it doesn't actually need to be paid for quite some considerable time because of the balance in hand of the fund which has been invested so well from its employees, employers and taxpayers' funds that have been well invested, which means that the fund is in such a good position. So my principles are of financial prudence and financial properness and balancing the most important issues, which are that the stabilisation fund, which is our rainy day reserve, I would suggest that we do not take money out of it to put into a fund this year that is already in excess of hugely in excess of what it's required as a pay-as-you-go social security system, as a social security fund. Other places have tinkered with it. We haven't. And this is perfectly in line with what we should be doing, having taken an overall approach to long-term funding of a long-term fund, but we should be cautious. The rainy day fund is also to be looked at, and if we start moving money from the strategic reserve imprudently, as our economic advisors have told us to do, they've said not to take money. They've said the opposite of what Deputy Balashes is saying. They've said we push more money in. And he's basically saying that the principle of economic and financial matters should be overridden. I don't agree, sir. This is a proper arrangement which is properly going to be brought into an amendment to the law, which is perfectly permissible. And the Deputy will know there has been some numerous amendments. He has been in this place for a long time, and he knows that there has been proper legal amendments made to reflect the economic situation of the time, and it was right that there was a pause in supplementation payments to deal with COVID and other periods. And we are still dealing, unfortunately, with the COVID hangover, and the hangover that now we have a general problem with an economic situation which is not good and favourable, but we have to do our best, and we have to use resources in the right way and allocate them on a prioritised basis. My priority is the strategic reserve, which should not be having funds withdrawn from it when it's not needed to. And I ask members to bear that in mind in their deliberations about whether they are going to move money from one fund to another in order to meet something that's got a lesser requirement, which is the Social Security Fund today. The undertakings of the ministers should not be underestimated. Undertakings are given, but when the facts change, ministers have to change their mind and present this Assembly with sensible decisions. And that is exactly what the Social Security Minister and the Council of Ministers is doing. So I would ask Deputy Balash, please, to maybe curb his comments on principles, because my principles are equal to his. I have principles, and I have economic and financial principles that must be reflected in law, and they will be done so. And I urge members to reject the amendment. Well-intentioned, but I think it forgets the principles of financial and economic matters, and it just looks at a law, but the law I've mentioned also has the provision of the actuarial review, and I urge members to reject the amendment.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. At some point, very early on in my career as a States member, a member of the public sent me an invitation to join a Facebook group. It was called Codger's Corner. And anyway, Codger's Corner posts these jokes. And so I thought actually it was quite a nice thing to do. I thought, basically, notwithstanding the implication, that the member of the public was trying to cheer me up. And indeed, there are jokes that have cheered me up on Codger's Corner. Even the one that says, what do you call a group of politicians? A pack of lies. Anyway, I have found this a very difficult proposition to come to a position on, because whilst I very much accept what Deputy Balash has said about the importance of government being held accountable and to its commitments, there also are consequences in terms of eating into the strategic reserve. And one thing that really frustrates me to some extent is a lot can be traced back to the proposition that was brought by Deputy Luce in terms of the rural and fisheries funding, which I supported, and the attempts to not eat into the strategic reserve given the size of that funding. And I guess it's all perhaps well to speak in hindsight, but I guess I think it's perhaps a pity that it wasn't brought in the context of the government plan, and perhaps that was the reason, but also that the Council of Ministers perhaps didn't talk through States members more in terms of the potential consequences. It's a very difficult call. And I certainly don't really relish the idea of going around my constituency, facing the many pensioners who live there, who basically will be suggesting that I'm just encouraging government to rob them of their pension pot. But it is a reserve. I do also feel that the Strategic Reserve Fund is becoming a bit of a smokescreen in terms of its being shown to support the island, presenting itself as having a strong economy, And it needs to do that to promote itself in terms of the finance industry and in other respects. But what's happening behind the scenes is exactly this, isn't it? We've got a government plan where, in fact, the Technology Accelerator Fund's also kind of, you know, chucking a few bob in the direction of the digital economy programme for government. Now, that's been highlighted, I believe, by both the Economic and International Affairs panel and the Corporate Scrutiny Services Scrutiny panel. This is happening as long as, and the continuation of more and more duties. Oh, yes, well, that's the RPI. Let's hike this up a bit. And, of course, oh, might it be inflationary? Oh, perhaps we won't look into that. And I really would like government to just wake up a bit and start rethinking in a much more productive manner than we're seeing. We're talking about actually being more productive. We're talking about economic productivity. How about actually rethinking the way that you're doing your tax in a much more fundamental way? And indeed, how about delivering that value for money programme that, at least in the case of one minister, was promised in terms of the arm's length organisations that my panel at least refused, was actually promised by the end of this year, but hasn't actually happened. And by value of money review, I really would hope that we aren't just talking about, oh, you know, you just need to find X million. I actually was imagining, more for me perhaps, that there would be some really kind of serious investigation of how departments are managed, how they would be managed in a way that is more productive, more efficient, doesn't necessarily have to be by the acquisition of technology. It can actually be through methods that involve more modern management methods. This is the sort of thing that I was very much hopeful that maybe we would see now, some true modernisation in terms of mindset and attitudes, and it's not happened. So I regret to say that I will be supporting government on this occasion, somewhat resentfully. Whilst I very much respect Deputy Balash's intent, that I'm afraid that the Strategic Reserve Fund has got a purpose. It does need to be preserved, but I'm really do expect government to start doing something better than this sort of programme.
Deputy Southall.
Thank you, sir. And it's a rare occurrence for me to stand and completely support the words of Deputy Balash. Deputy Balash, when he gets it right, boy does he get things right. He is absolutely correct saying that this is a ring-fenced fund which shouldn't be touched. And promises were made, call them principles if you like, promises were made previously to repay the money that was being lent for a short period of time because of COVID, and that would be paid back in the following schedule. Specified completely. Absolutely right that it should be paid back. And I can hear from the strong language used by Deputy Balash that this really means something to him, as it does to me. The ring-fenced nature of the fund, the Social Security funds, should be preserved. We can't, whenever we choose, we've made an exception last time, but whenever we choose, we can't dip into this just because it's not taxpayers' money. By and large, 85% of it is pensioners' money. That's the reality. And we fiddle with this, I think that's the correct term, at our peril. Because the faith of all those pensioners, the faith of every worker when he pays his his contribution is that it's paid into a fund which will support him in their later life. And without the sacrosanct nature of the ring fence, does that calls into question, oh, is it? It's just like tax. No, it's not just like tax. This is your fund for your benefit, for your pension, by and large. And you can trust us to look after it and not to mess with it. That's the reality. And support for Deputy Balash, for my part, is absolutely solid. He's absolutely right.
Deputy Taddy.
It's funny when you miss certain deputies who are no longer in the Assembly. And when I used to sit over on the back row and I'd have another deputy, a long-serving deputy in front of me, who would say, "This is jam tomorrow." Because we're hearing promises about what will be done tomorrow, that in the future, don't worry, we're going to repay this money. And then we're also hearing about that we don't know what's coming around the corner. We're told that we're in a very strong position, but then we're also told that the economy is in a very difficult position, and that's why we need to that's why we can't make this usual payment that we make into the Social Security Fund that we would normally make, so we're actually using that money. And I have to agree that it does boil down to sophistry. It is a specious argument. That's what it boils down to. And I know sometimes it's incorrect to make analogies directly with personal income and what families might do, but I think in this case there is a valid analogy to be made. And I can't help thinking, and I hope this isn't offensive to anyone, but we've already heard the term codger used in this assembly. And I didn't find that joke offensive necessarily, but I was waiting for the humour. It's about I'm sure there are other good posts in there, and it's obviously very subjective, isn't it? I'm thinking of the old boy who outwardly lives a life of austerity and dresses like a pauper, and he goes around saying, "Can you lend me 50p, governor, so that I can have a cup of tea?" But then actually when you get back to his ramshackled home, there's millions of pounds under his bed, either stuffed in the mattress or in a briefcase. And so, or a better analogy is that you've got somebody who's got a current account, and that's their spending money. They've got a savings account, which has got lots of money in it, but they're also paying into their pension pot because they know that, 30 years' time they're going to need it. They don't know what the future is, and they're keeping up their payments on a regular basis. But they get into a little bit of trouble that year. Their expenditure has got higher, and they haven't gone out to get another job or to ask for a pay rise from their employer. So they actually say, you know what, rather than dipping into my savings account, because I want to keep that savings account there, I could take a small percentage out to use to cover my living costs. What I'm going to do is just not pay my pension contribution this month. And their pension advisor may well get on the phone if they're a pension advisor who's worth their salt and say, "Are you sure you want to be doing this? Because you might just be doing it this month, but if you carry on doing it next month and the month after, you're soon going to find that fund is dwindling, and then we may not be able to invest that." And so the other thing that we haven't heard about is that actually there is an opportunity cost in the Social Security funds, because that money that's not being paid in would also be getting invested. It would also be getting the interest at the very least, but it'd be being invested for the specific purpose which the fund was set up for. And I think that's the other strong argument that we have here. There is a contract between the public, between the employee and the employer and the state. And it's not just this government, but it's governments and the state in its wider form, the past, present and future. And when we've got one government that just comes forward and says, actually, we're going to not do this time, even though we've said we would, and even though we said we'd replenish the money, you can understand that there's a wider issue of that relationship and that trust, not simply because they've not fulfilled their obligation to refund the monies into the account, but also because that social contract is being changed at a whim and without any consultation with the public and the other party there. So I think that is problematic. I would also say that there needs to be some longer term thinking, because there is a question here about what constitutes a rainy day fund. We can, euphemistically, we can call it a rainy day fund or a strategic reserve. And questions have to be asked about when you do use that fund. Is it only for an extreme situation when something bad has already happened? and it's supposed to pay for what, 1 year of expenditure? Or do we use it perhaps more proactively to actually invest to save and foresee problems that might be coming down the line and using it like that second or third bank account that we might have in order to offset those? Lastly, I hope Deputy Balash doesn't think that this is too much of a dig, because I think we've given him lots of support in this particular proposition, but I will be interested to hear what the other half of his party has to say. If I were a betting man, I won't say actually, I'll let the other half of the party speak. I'm not sure which wing, if it's the Liberal or the Conservative wing of the party. But we know that Deputy Balash is principled, I think, and he's spoken on a very in a principled way. What I would say, though, is just generally, it's a bad day for party politics if the leader of the Liberal Conservatives can rely more on the support of Reform Jersey than he can on the rest of his own party. So, just slightly, sir, because I think, the bottom line is if the party can't vote together, then, what is the point in having a party? So it'd be nice to at least know that we've got Deputy Barbara Ward voting with Deputy Robert Ward for once. We've got Deputy Mezek and Deputy Balash voting together, and it'd be nice if the two parties could also stand on a principled agenda and say, actually, enough is enough. Don't rob Peter to pay Paul. Let's get a sustainable way and replenish the fund, as you said. And the last point I did want to make, actually, is that you can, of course, understand why the teachers would reject a pay offer, which is saying, look, we haven't got any money to pay you now, but you know what, in 2026, 2027, or 2025, 2026, we're going to give you RPI. We can guarantee that. What? Even if it's 20%? Even if it's 25%, you're going to guarantee us a 25% pay increase, even though you can't give it to us when it's a 10% increase. I think enough is enough. Don't pull the wool over our eyes anymore. Do the right thing and support this amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. And I'm not sure whether to be happy or sad or to be worried or content, because in the big book of excuses we've had over the last few years, Brexit, we've had COVID, recently we've had the storm, but most recently we've had Deputy Steve Luce, and twice today I've heard my name rolled out as one of the reasons why things can't be done by government. So from now on, at least I'll know that if I do hear my name mentioned, that somebody's in trouble and I need to start paying attention. And I congratulate government, sir, because they have responded to Deputy Balash and Deputy Barbara Ward as well as they can. They've thought hard, which they use an excuse. They've told us that the fund is in a really good state, and they're being prudent, and the FPP have told them that it's the right thing to do, sir. But I think we all know that deferring payments that you're obliged to make for once and then doing it a second time, it becomes year on year, and it's the start of a very slippery slope that very soon becomes the norm. And I warn members against it and urge them to support Deputy Balash.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Hegarau.
Thank you, sir. I have a vague memory of sitting in Fort Regent socially distancing as the chair of the then Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, when this sort of delaying of a payment reared its ugly head. And what happened was that I think for those of us that were still relatively new to the Assembly, probably didn't really fully understand all of the sort of bits and pieces to do with the Social Security funds. At that time, the money was needed for COVID, and it was long, hard and thought, and we agreed that the payment could be delayed. However, the actual panel at the time said, no, you can't delay it for the next 2 or 3 years or whatever it was at that particular time. We said you will bring it back next year. And there was a reason for that, because we didn't want to go down that slippery slope and continue to be pushing this back. What I do find very, very interesting, and maybe it's me that's got this all wrong, is the fact that this Social Security Fund is really very healthy, according to everybody, according to all the experts on funds. So I leave this with the Assembly as a whole, sir. If the fund is in such a good position, why are we pushing the pension age up?
Conor Greville.
Thank you, sir. I rise rarely, I know, but I would like to make 2 points. The first being that I've been to presentations given by the Social Security Department about long-term care and our pensions. And the projections I saw, the fund run out in 2040. They were making premises about the rising population, sir. And I'm firmly of the belief, having been round door to door in Greville, that we are going through a period of net migration, sir. And I think that's probably the first time since the Second World War that that has happened. And I don't think the Social Security Department should ignore that fact that we may be going through a period where people are more likely to leave than they are to come to the island, basically because it's a very expensive place to live. Secondly, sir, I went to a presentation given on higher education last week, where they claimed a survey had been done of secondary students, saying that if any of them went to higher education, 80% of them would not return to the island. I find that very alarming. And if there is this phrase, the bean drain, I think that's a very good example of what may be happening in our future. So I think we should all bear that very much in mind when we start talking about raiding our pension pot. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Hull.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Miller and Deputy Gorse gave us all an undertaking in February, and I believe them, sir. Now they're giving us an undertaking that they're going to defer payment, but they're going to make it up in 2024, 25, 26 and 27. But how do we know that, sir? Will they be in the States at that time? How many of us will be here? How can we say that we're going to make a payment in 26 and 27 because we just may not be able to? And so this island does have debt now, and I think perhaps the States, we're overspending. And I think we have to be very careful what we're doing. And we do not have to defer this payment into this pension pot or this social security. And I think we should do the right thing and support Deputy Balash's amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. And politics is always at best challenging, and politicians have to do things there which you in your position never do. And I can give you the benefit of my experience that eating humble pie when it is to be eaten is best not done in public. But of course, the reality is that when ministers presented the government plan last year, the proposal was to reintroduce the supplementation grant. And it's quite important that I just explain what that is, because it's apparent that there is some confusion about that. That is not connected any longer with the contributions that individuals make towards their pension, nor the contribution that employers make for those individuals that they employ towards their pension. It is a third leg of support, and that is provided by taxpayers. So this is not interfering with that, as others have said, sacred bond between employees and pensioners. So it is absolutely correct to say that the Social Security Reserve Fund, which stands at over £2 billion, we are unique. I don't know of any, other than perhaps oil-producing countries, I don't know of any other country that has such a reserve to pay for pensioners? I can't think of one, sir, but I'm happy for any member to interrupt me and tell me of a non-oil producing country that has a £2 billion pension pot to pay old age pensions. It is right that bond, that trust, is maintained. It is also right to say that during COVID, in order to pay the many hundreds of millions of pounds that government paid to individuals via their employer, that it was the right thing to do to not make that tax contribution to the fund at that time, because it was healthy, and it remains healthy when, as the Minister said to us, we looked at the actuarial review. It was the right thing to do. Ministers have got to present a government plan which is balanced. And this government plan reintroduces a large part of the taxpayer contribution into the Social Security Reserve Fund, as detailed in the comments paper to the amendment. It doesn't reintroduce it all. That's absolutely right, which is what ministers had hoped to be able to do and had indicated to this Assembly they would do. And to that extent, I accept the reprimand of the mover of this proposition. But let us be clear, it does reintroduce £50 million worth of taxpayers' money on top of the contributions that all employees and employers are making to the Social Security Fund. Just not quite in the fulsome manner that the mover of this proposition would like. So I don't think I have ever been referred to as I don't think I've ever been referred to as Mr. Robert Maxwell, and certainly not in this Assembly. For one thing, we have a quite different physique, but there are many other differences as well. And of course, I enjoyed Deputy Barbara Ward's commentary around pensions. And I have find myself with little to disagree upon in regard to her comments about pensions. But we remind ourselves that what we are talking about today is the old age pension. It is not the employees or state's employee pension or the teacher's pension, which she sat on as a quasi-trustee. I enjoyed my period sitting on that very same panel as well. And there are, of course, we know that those pensions are themselves in surplus and have got extremely healthy, substantial reserves, unlike the Mirror Group pensions, or I should say the previous Mirror Group pensions, and what the then owner of the Mirror Group did to those pensions. And so it is a totally different position that we find ourselves in today with what is being proposed by ministers and what the amendment is proposing. So members didn't object when in the mini-budget ministers brought forward the proposed reduction in social security contributions, which again, it was a positive decision to support islanders during that period of the cost of living crisis, nor was it suggested that those contributions should, those individuals should pay back those reductions either. So it is quite important that we say, to my recollection, and I could be wrong, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, wouldn't be the first time either, sir. There was never any, not on policy matters, as my friends in Reform might be indicating by their stomping. It wouldn't be, I do not recall, sir, any commitment given to repay those COVID monies foregone at any point in the past. It would not make economic sense, and I'll come on to that as well. Because I fear that the mover of the proposition feels passionately about reinstating the full amount as quickly as possible, and is not satisfied with this very substantial reinstatement on a phased basis. But I'm not sure, sir, that his heart really is in taking the money from the strategic reserve either, for all of the reasons that he knows the strategic reserve is there for. And it is important, we have reserves, we have different pots that we don't mix and match in the way that some have suggested we should. The Constable of Grouville talked to us about the long-term care fund. That, of course, is a wholly different fund as well. That does have money in from taxpayers contributing, as well as taxpayers contributing through their ITIS rate, and pensioners as well, as we know. And we know from the actuarial review that that is the fund which is under most pressure, and that is the work that the Social Security Minister is doing and will need to come forward with proposals to deal with that fund. But the economists were absolutely clear, and I hope that Deputy Barbara Ward won't mind me referring to a question that she put to the Fiscal Policy Panel when they fed back on their review of the government plan and the economic conditions, because she asked the question that she of them that she often asked me, and that is, should we not repay that money back into the Social Security fund? And it's relevant because their answer was no, that would not be economically sensible. If you are going to put more money into any of your reserves, the reserve you should put money into is the strategic reserve. They'd also like to see us putting money into the stabilisation fund, which is why, sir, I've got that provision in the government plan to, at the year end, if at all possible, to put money into the stabilisation fund. But I remind members again that the balancing of this government plan was made, and I don't make this as a criticism of any individual, but was made so much more difficult than where we thought it was at the start of this process because of the challenges that the health service is facing. And this government plan puts substantial money into the health service, helps them with their programme to deliver appropriate health services to islanders, because I think that is really quite an important priority for government. I think it's a really important priority for islanders. Any member who's had either a family member or a constituent who's had to engage either on a ward or on a waiting list. No criticism of the individuals involved, because they are absolutely first class, but they are struggling under the weight of medication and operations and waiting lists that are required. And it's right that we work with the health team to address those challenges. And that's where the pressure in this government plan comes from. And that is why ultimately ministers thought it's best, absolutely, we've got to stick with that commitment to reintroduce supplementation. Sorry, so technical paying for taxpayers' money into the fund. But that it was right that at this stage we didn't do it fully, but we help support health with the problems that they have got. And I know that no member is saying it's the wrong thing to help health. Every member knows it's the right thing to do. But that is the balance that we had to deal with. And so, sir, I really do ask members to think very carefully. Even those who absolutely think the principle of reinstating of the grant is really important. It is important. Ministers accept that. They have not in this plan been able to propose the full reinstatement. And they hold their hands up and apologise for that. I've got no qualms in doing that. But I do think that the move of the proposition doesn't really quite think money coming from the strategic reserve, the rainy day fund, to do this is either the right approach, and it certainly is not the approach that the independent economists say that we should do. Again, it is with a heavy heart that I ask members not to support this amendment today. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Conrad Harbison, John.
Thank you, sir. So I was really interested to hear Deputy Gore's speech and the passion he had. So I wish he would have shown some of that passion when asking colleagues to show restraint in their spending plans for next year. So we've heard about the need to do better. So I don't believe we should be taking money out of either of the funds. So we should be living within our means. A £1.2 billion budget for an island of 103,000 people is amazingly high, and we should be doing better to live within that. We heard from Deputy Ozoff about good economic management. Well, I would respectfully suggest to him, sir, that good economic management would have seen us live within our limits and not need an extra £20 million. He also mentioned about financial and economic principles. It appears they don't stretch to being disciplined when spending, sir. Deputy Scott spoke, quite rightly in my opinion, about improved efficiencies and living within our means. We really should listen to the Deputy when she talks about this. We really need to do far, far better in that area. So I've no doubt that in the future we'll be discussing personal pensions, workplace pensions in this Assembly, where we'll be discussing the need for financial discipline from individuals and businesses. I believe we should be leading on that front, sir, and not say, do as I say, not do as I do. We really should be far more disciplined when it comes to this, and I will be supporting Deputy Balash. Thank you, sir.
Right. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, thank you. So I want to look at this idea of a great principle being violated. Because to me, it seems that over the 4-year plan, the whole amount will be paid to the Social Security Fund, Reserve Fund, and therefore it will be ring-fenced. It is therefore a reprofiling. It's a rearrangement of the payment schedules. Instead of putting the amount in every year, it rearranges instead of putting the amount in every year that was previously said, it rearranges the amounts paid in each year to achieve the same effect. £345 million will go into the Social Security Fund from the government budget over the government funds over the budget period. Let's test the great amorality that is at stake here with a little thought experiment. If you went to sleep today and woke up in 4 years' time, you would see that the Social Security Fund was exactly where it should be. You would care not a jot whether less money was paid in the first couple of years and then more in the last couple of years. That's not sophistry. It misses the central point. The fund will be in exactly the same position as if it had been paid by the same amount each year. So it is not, therefore, at the expense of pensioners. Not a single pensioner or any other recipient of money from the Social Security Fund will lose out. Not a single one. The argument is advanced that essentially some members don't trust us to keep to that payment schedule. Well, I guess fair enough. That's a pretty nihilistic argument to bring to this assembly. Why trust us on anything that is in the government plan? It all involves 4 years of tax raising and spending measures. So in my view, the principle that Deputy Balash is talking about here is a principle without a purpose. The principle is that the money should never be taken out of the Social Security Fund. The purpose should be to protect pensioners and other beneficiaries. We are emphatically not violating that fundamental purpose or the principle. There is no theft, nothing immoral, nothing improper. The far worse principle, as Deputy Joseph said, would be to raid the strategic reserve. We are supposed to be building that up. That is a very clear message. That is the area of our vulnerability, not the Social Security Fund. The area of our vulnerability is the strategic reserve and indeed the other funds that the other stabilisation fund, I beg your pardon, the stabilisation fund. These are the important things that we must be building up. That is a principle worth defending. The Social Security Fund, on the other hand, is in rude health, and we simply acknowledge that we can achieve the same ends by simply reprofiling the expenditure. I therefore urge members to reject Deputy Balash's amendment. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Balash to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to thank all members who have participated in this debate, particularly, if I may say so, those members of the Reform Party who have indicated support for this proposition. And Deputy Tadier is, of course, right to tweak the tail of the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, but then parties do get into difficult positions when they form quasi-alliances with a government. And I seem to recall that Deputy Mezek got himself into a bit of a spot of bother when he joined the government a little while ago. So conflicts are created and conflicts have to be resolved as best they can be. So I don't want to compound the embarrassment of my friends, the ministers on the other side of the chamber. But I will say in response to Deputy Ozuf, who quoted the passage from that famous economist, which he is fond of quoting, when the facts change, then my opinion changes, which was essentially what the Minister of Social Security was saying. But the difficulty is that the facts have not changed. We have had an actuary's report, it is true, but there was never any suggestion, I think, that the Social Security Fund was not in a good position. And the essential fact is that the Social Security Fund is money that belongs to pensioners, and it should not be played with. So I don't propose to repeat everything that I said in opening this debate. I will only say that an important principle is, in my view, at stake. And that principle is that funds in the Social Security Department belong to pensioners and prospective pensioners, and not to the states. And that's the principle which Deputy Renouf doesn't seem to be able to understand. These funds give security to all islanders that in the uncertain years ahead, there will be money available to assure that a basic pension can be paid to everyone. And we should not use this money for other purposes. Whether balancing the books, paying for health, or paying for the COVID pandemic, these are things for which social security funds should not be used. And using the fund for that last purpose was a fundamental mistake. It's given birth, I think, to the assumption that these pension funds are a kind of piggy bank, as Deputy Barbara Ward said, into which the government and states can dip whenever it is convenient to do so. Deputy Luce was quite right to talk about a slippery slope. That's exactly where we are, because here we had a government which but 9 months ago was saying, no, we will never take money out of the social security funds again. In effect, that was what was being said. And here we are in December doing exactly that. The problem is, and Constable of St John put his finger on this, is that we haven't got enough money in the consolidated fund. We should have, but we have not got enough money in the consolidated fund. And what do we do about it? Do we go to a ring-fenced fund, as Deputy Southern accurately described it, or do we go to the strategic reserve? And if the money is going to be repaid in 2027, as the government assures us that it is, then what is the problem with going to the strategic reserve? It is the principle, and how important is the principle to members? It's very important to me, and I don't think that the principle should be broken. The Social Security Fund will be vulnerable in the future, and pensions for our pensioners will be vulnerable if we get into the habit of thinking that this is a slush fund which can be resorted to whenever there is a difficulty in balancing the books of the consolidated fund. So I move the amendment and I ask for the appel.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the first amendment. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 26 votes pour, 21 votes contre, no abstentions.
So could I ask for all the votes to be read out, please?
Those members voting pour, the Connétable of St Brelard, Trinity, St Martin, St John, St Clement, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Luce, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Owls, Farnham, Mesick, Balash, Coles, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Rose Binet, Howell, Kovac and Barbara Ward, and those members voting contre, the Connétable of St Helier and St Peter, and Deputies Labby, Morell, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, Moore, Osif, War, Miles, Scott, Renouf, Jearn, Miller, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Wilson, Stevenson, Andrews and Doublé.
Very well. The next matter to be debated is the 18th Amendment brought by Deputy Alves, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, paragraph E. After the words Appendix 2, Summary Table 3, in line with Article 9(2)b of the law, insert the words, except that a new line should be inserted in Summary Table 3 to include a transfer of £75,000 from the Health Insurance Fund to the Consolidated Fund to allocate funds to extend the free GP visits for children and young people scheme to all full-time students, including students in full-time education undertaking higher education at Highlands College, colleges and universities in the UK or abroad. Page 2, paragraph H. After the words Appendix 2, Summary Tables 5.1 and 2 of the report, insert the words, except that, in Summary Table 5.1, the head of expenditure for health and community services should be increased by £75,000 to allocate funds to extend the free GP visits for children and young people scheme to all full-time students, including students in full-time education undertaking higher education at Highlands College, colleges and universities in the UK or abroad.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. This amendment seeks to address what I think is a gap in the current offering of free GP consultations for young people and an inconsistency in access to free services by those studying on and off island. Last year, the government approved my amendment to the government plan to provide free GP consultations for children and young people aged 0 to 17. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the Social Security Minister for doing this work and extending it to cover access to a range of additional services. However, this has highlighted an issue with those turning 18 when in full-time education. For example, there are 2 students in the same academic year group attending the same educational establishment. One has a birthday in September, the other has their birthday in August. The student whose birthday is in September will have to pay for their GP consultations for the majority of the academic year, while their colleague, who has their birthday in August, will not. The arguments and issues that were raised in favour of the original amendment last year to provide children and young people with free GP consultations do not suddenly disappear because somebody turns 18 before somebody else. This person will still experience many of the same issues, including financial dependency on someone else. The other issue that has been highlighted to me is the disparity that currently exists between those studying full-time on island and those studying off island. For example, there are 2 students over the age of 17. One is studying off island in the UK and the other is studying on island. They are both full-time students, for example, studying a degree course, which you can do on island as well as in the UK. The student studying in the UK has access to free GP consultations along with some additional services provided for by the NHS. The student studying on island does not have the same access. Again, both these students will face the same difficulties. Students are among some of the most vulnerable students are among some of the most vulnerable groups, and they are more likely to have to depend financially on someone else and therefore unable to access the care that they need in a timely manner, whilst also respecting their need for privacy. As highlighted in my report, and that I will not cover again, keeping students healthy has a much wider, far-reaching impact. It produces positive outcomes in academic performance, economic contributions and productivity, public health and disease prevention, inclusion and equality, and long-term savings. So, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I hope that members can see the value of this amendment and will vote in favour of it. I make the amendment.
Is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to... Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. As Deputy Alves said, much of what's going to be said today will probably have been said last year as well. Sir, Deputy Alves and her Reform Jersey colleagues have put forward a wide range of proposals in recent years to extend government support for health costs. This year, she has commented on our expansion of following her proposal, the introduction of free GP visits for children and young people that came into play last year. that is very clearly for children up to the age of 17. And I would simply make the point that a child, under the definition contained in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, is a young person under the age of 18. So we are not talking about children, we are very clearly talking about adults over the age of 18. So this year, ministers are pleased to support the proposals from Deputy Kovac to extend existing support for wound dressings and medical hosiery to create a large-scale scheme during 2024. Ministers are also supporting the proposal from Deputy Feltham to provide additional financial assistance to parents of children with serious health conditions. In both cases, there is a clear medical need driving the scheme. Unfortunately, the same argument cannot be made in respect of full-time students, and ministers cannot support Deputy Al's proposal to provide free surgery consultations to adult students. Access to timely primary care is an important part of all modern health systems. Since 2020, low-income families and pensioners have been able to access surgery visits for a fixed fee of £12 per adult. During 2023, I took clear action to reduce the cost of cheap GP visits for all adults, with a £20 reduction with all GP surgeries from June. From July, all children's surgery visits have been free. Our pharmacy initiatives will also benefit islanders in terms of reducing costs of GP visits and prescription costs. The Deputy's report suggests that full-time students are the next most vulnerable group after children aged under 18. So I have some concern with the way we use the word vulnerable. Is somebody who is 18 about to go to university, to leave home, to study in the UK, possibly in another country, are they really vulnerable? And vulnerable to what? They are young, healthy. Most of them, as the Deputy says herself, may have one visit a year. So the idea that they are all vulnerable in some way, I think needs questioning. Sir, I can reassure members that low-income adults are already covered by the Health Access Scheme and receive surgery visits for £12. Young adults with a significant disability are also covered by the Health Access Scheme, even if they remain living at home in a non-income support family. All care leavers have full access to primary care services, I believe, up to the age of 25. These groups of young people are covered whether or not they're students. And so I do have a number of questions about the Deputy's proposition. Why cover this group? There are elements of unfairness. The Deputy suggested slightly that the young person involved is at maybe at school or maybe at Highlands. Where does it stop? What about part-time students who don't earn very much and otherwise? What if someone doesn't go to university until they're 23? What if they go and work in financial services for a couple of years and build up a nice nest egg and then go to university when they're 23? Are they covered? What if they do a second degree and then do a PhD? What is the cut-off point in all of this? It's very unclear. There are also some, there will be some considerable logistical issues in this because we simply do not know who all the full-time students are. I haven't been able to gain information, but we think at least 25% of students do not receive any grant funding, so we don't necessarily know who they are. It will be difficult to know how doctors prove who full-time students are and who aren't. So I think we need to be very careful about what we do with GP visits. I know that reform feel closely that healthcare should be free for all, but we only have to look to the UK to see just how difficult that is. Deputy Al said very confidently that a student from Jersey studying in the UK can see a GP free of charge for nothing. An elderly relative of mine who is 87, 3 weeks ago, needed to see a doctor. So she phoned on the Monday morning. She didn't phone first thing because she knew it'd be busy, so she phoned mid-morning. The call handling service told her that she was number 18 in the queue. She waited a long time to speak to someone, and when she did, she was told that that number was only now dealing with emergencies and she had to call again tomorrow. The following morning, she called again, She was number 24 in the queue. And again, she waited a very long time to speak to someone and was told that there were no appointments left. She would phone again today. She phoned the third day, again was 20-something in the queue, and again was told to call back. She asked if she could make an appointment for the following week when her doctor, her GP, that she normally sees was back from holiday, and she was told no, she cannot make an appointment in advance, because that's not how they do things. You have to phone and just see whether you're in the lottery for an appointment that day. So what are we suggesting? That children are going to are getting medical appointments when old people can't? 87, and she can't see a doctor. This is what we're looking at. The NHS, the notion of free care for everybody, is simply not happening. So what are we going to do? Are we going to say to Jersey students, don't bother, keep your illness, stay ill for 10 weeks, then come home and see a doctor in Jersey? We need to be careful. We are in a global shortage of doctors. Everything we do, we have to be very careful. Everything we do that increases the pressure on doctors risks older people in Jersey who potentially are vulnerable not getting to see doctors. We have to value GP's time, and simply making it free for people who don't really need it is not helpful. We cannot run a health service making piecemeal amendments to our healthcare system. The overall cost of our health system will rise steadily in coming years as we enjoy longer lives. Some of those lives will be healthier than others. The Minister for Health and Social Services is leading a major review of future health systems and funding challenges, and will report back to the Assembly by the end of next year. In the meantime, ministers will continue to support well-targeted schemes to support access to healthcare, subject to the need to provide sustainable funding for these schemes in future years. So for all of those reasons, this scheme is not well targeted, it will be difficult to operate, it will be unfair among numerous classes of young people, and I urge members to oppose it. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on this amendment? If no other member, Deputy Taddy.
Thanks, sir. We've heard, I think, a well-rehearsed argument from our Social Security Minister, which I think contained quite a lot of non sequiturs. So the main argument is basically, she seemed to be arguing against the principle of free GP visits full stop, which is not what's being proposed here. It's for, we already have free GPs for those under 17, so up to 17, and Deputy Alves is simply asking that this be extended to those in full-time education. And the point of, if you're in full-time education, then you can't be working. So the commonality between someone under the age of 18 and somebody who's a student is that you're certainly not in full-time work. And if you do a little bit of part-time work here and there, it's to cover the costs of your tuition, your lodgings, etc. And that surely has got to be one of the compelling reasons. You don't have an income stream, therefore you need that support. And how often have we heard from, from all sections of the Assembly, also previous assemblies, and we've heard it, I think, from the probably from the Assistant Minister at Education and Young People, and possibly the Minister, about this cliff face that young people can face at the age of 18. I'm also thinking about care leavers. We mustn't forget those in all of this. When you get to the age of 18, everything changes, and then you're considered an adult, you're pushed out into the big wide world. But in reality, that's not the case at all, is it? There's 18 to 25-year-olds are still very dependent. They may be doing their education in Jersey, they may be doing it in the UK. And so we've simply heard this argument that a foreign country, so Deputy Miller has talked about a foreign country which has got a bad health system. She thinks there's a foreign country to the north of us called the United Kingdom, which has got a bad health system. And so one of her relatives had trouble getting an appointment. But what's that got to do with anything? I feel sorry for her relative, but we're not trying to replicate that system in Jersey. And it has to be said that if there's a student at university in the UK who's also picking up that phone trying to get an appointment with the GP in the UK, he or she will be going through that same problem where the phone will be there, you're 25th in the queue, was it? 19th, 20th in the queue, and that student won't be able to get an appointment in the UK. So they've either got a choice of not getting an appointment with the GP in the UK, we're being told, or coming back to Jersey and having to pay for a GP when perhaps only a year earlier they were getting free access to GPs. And so what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to go to their parents and say, can you lend me 20 quid, please, so I can go and see the GP? Why do you want to go and see the GP? Oh, well, I need to talk to them about something a bit private. Well, can you not talk to me about it? I don't really have £20 on me. So this is the reality of what I think Deputy Alves is trying to do. It's not saying, you know, fundamentally break our health system. It's saying that we already have access for certain groups in our community, some of whom could be considered vulnerable, and there will be students in that area who are vulnerable as well. Just simply extend it to the point where they finish their education and where they start working. I don't think that's a radical proposition. I think it's a moderate one, and I very much see the comments of the Social Security Minister as scaremongering and not relevant.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to thank Deputy Tadia, actually, because I was sat here thinking there's something wrong with that argument that's just been made, and I didn't work it out. And he used the phrase non sequitur, and I have to admit, sir, I had to look it up because I've never been quite sure what that means. It means a conclusion from a statement that does not logically follow from the previous argument or statement. And I think he used that phrase beautifully, because what we had was an argument that said, and this is what we get every single time. And yes, I'm very, very, very proud that as a member of Reform, we have brought consistently principled, that terrible thing called principles. They really do get in the way, sir, sometimes, when you're elected on them. Those principles that we believe people should access to healthcare, which is also a really key principle, sir, in delivering good healthcare, because primary healthcare, as recognised by the Health Minister, is absolutely vital in a healthcare system that works. Early diagnosis, early treatment means better outcomes for everybody involved, particularly for young people. And I want to mention a couple of things. This argument that young people are not vulnerable, I think that's a very, very, very risky argument. I really hope that young people don't have vulnerabilities. I really hope they do. I hope they're secure in everything they do. But I remember being young, and we all have vulnerabilities at that age and need the support of those around us. And when they go off to university or they start studying, the pressures of studying, the pressures of being away from home, the pressures of being independent can exacerbate those vulnerabilities. And anything that we can do to give access to care and help in a private way is worth every single penny that we spend from this assembly. And this small amount of money that will be spent on this relatively small amount of money, which could secure 1, 2, 3, 20, 30, I don't know how many young people going to get the help they need, and having early intervention is worth every single penny. And I think I dispute that notion. But there also seems to be a contradictory, I don't know if it's a tautology or not, but this idea that if we make it free, we'll flood the GPs with people, young people, but young people are fit and don't need the GP. So which is it? Yeah. You can't have it both ways. We have young, healthy young people who want to go to the GP. Well, I don't know about you, sir, but when I was young, the worst thing was going to the GP, particularly if my mum took me. I don't want to talk to the GP with my mum there. And young people need to have that privacy to talk about their health needs. We all know that. And actually, so I'm extraordinarily disappointed that this wasn't accepted by government. I know we don't have the, the put children first motto anymore, because I think we all realise the last government wasn't really doing that. But I really hope that the notion of it stayed with us, that we would look after our young people. And it is recognised quite rightly elsewhere. I'll say to Deputy Tadia, the other side of that is care leavers do have the care leavers offer until 25. Quite rightly, because we are providing that support for them. And I don't mind money going on that, because it's the right thing to do. And if you want to be purely economic, It'll save money in the long term because people get access to healthcare, do something about it, and look after themselves better. We're all parents. I'm a parent, sir, and I worry about my children. Totally unduly, and I catastrophise every time I think there's something wrong. I've got to stop doing it, but I do it all the time. To the point where I'll message my son and say, can you ring me? Because that's the only way he'll contact me because he thinks there's something wrong. He's going to run out eventually. And then I'll just check he's okay. Now, I want him to be able to access a GP where he can. And actually, in the UK, when he was at university, sir, there were campus GPs, and it actually wasn't such a long wait anyway. So I think that's another false argument. And we are not the NHS. I mean, I'm tempted to say that's what happens when you leave the Tories in charge of the NHS for 13 years. But anyway, or the Conservatives, or the Liberals. I don't know which we are now. But anyway, but I think there's some really strange arguments being hammered here. This is simple, and I'm very pleased that Deputy Owls kept her opening speech so simple and short, because it's exactly what it is. There's a loophole. Let's fill that loophole. Let's provide the service that we can on this island. We proved we can do for young people, just to extend it to full-time students. And I urge members of this Assembly, think really carefully before you accept these false arguments and to support this amendment, and we can leave today having done something very positive for this island. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Ferrier.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to add my support to the Social Security Minister and her ministerial colleagues. In my view, the mover of this amendment has failed to make the case to provide free access to full-time students. Her own calculations show that this group typically only visits the GP just over once a year and quotes the average price of a student consultation at £33. This is the equivalent of less than £40 for a whole year, sir. We already have a scheme for low-income students. We already support care leavers. And we already support disabled students. We already provide free, confidential sexual health services for young adults via the Brooks service. While the overall cost of the Deputy's scheme is not high, this is not a reason for accepting it. I ask members to reject this amendment, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Sutherland.
Yes, sir. I thought I heard the Minister suggest that a financial picture of the state of our health service and the needs of our health service is going to be available by the end of next year. Can she confirm that? Or even perhaps the Health Minister might suggest a different timescale, because I understood that we were going to get this full picture of the economics of health in the island by the end of Q1 of this year, or this coming year. Can either of them just clarify what the state is?
Well, I'm afraid the Social Security Minister has spoken and cannot speak again in the debate. Whether the Health Minister chooses to speak is a different matter. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. I am happy to answer the Deputy's question and to say that the initial first phase of the work has been completed on the sustainable health funding, and we are on track to produce some proposals during 2024. We'll try and bring those forward if we can, but we are sticking to the original timescale. I just want to support colleagues in social services around the efforts to actually increase and improve access to primary health care. As colleagues have already mentioned, there has been a number of initiatives designed to actually address access issues for both children and adults over the last couple of months. And whilst I agree in principle that access should be universal in terms of improving health outcomes for people, that doesn't come at the expense of doing that on a free basis all of the time. And I think we have to be proportionate in our approach to how we actually develop access to healthcare for people across the island, particularly targeted healthcare, which allows us to use the resources that people have talked about today that need to be used more efficiently and more effectively. I think as part of the health strategy work that we're going to be bringing forward for next year, one of the areas that we want to focus on is the importance of prevention. And I would like to propose that this is where we would work with young people to understand how and in what way they would like to access healthcare. What is their needs? Why should we just be forcing them down the line of a GP contact? Their needs are diverse. They have views about what they want from a healthcare service. And I think on that basis, sir, I would urge members to consider that there are other opportunities, other alternatives to providing better healthcare for students that we'll be discussing in the new year.
Thank you, Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I congratulate Deputy Alves on bringing this amendment, and I defy any member of this Assembly to try to muster up an argument to claim that her previous amendment to make GP consultations for children free was anything other than a huge resounding success that has had a positive impact on those children and their families who otherwise would have been paying. And the feedback that I get from health professionals is one of overwhelming support for it. It has been a thoroughly good thing. And the reason for that, sir, is because it's based on a sound principle, the principle of free at the point of need, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, which when it comes to healthcare, there is no finer principle, because when your health decisions are affected by your access to money, you don't always make the best health decision. You put off things, you don't get the timely help when you need, and that ends up for things being more expensive or sometimes more harmful in the long run. And so that is why I'll make no apologies for saying that we ought to one day get to that situation where access to primary healthcare is free at the point of need for all islanders, so every islander can get the healthcare they need when they need it in a timely fashion, and not have to rely on artificially keeping the queues down by charging people, and also, sir, ending up with added pressure at A&E, because people who can't afford it end up putting it off and then end up presenting themselves there because they've got no other opportunity and are met with those signs on the door making them feel guilty for not having been able to afford to get primary health care, which probably would have avoided their need to go to A&E in the first place. Sir, I think the explanation of people's experiences as students has been one from ministers has been completely out of touch with the real life experiences of students. I remember when I was a student, I was skint all the time. All the time. I lived thousands of pounds into an overdraft. I had thousands of pounds of debt, and that wasn't because I wasn't working part-time when I could as well to make extra money. It's because I was spending that on my rent, I was spending it on my books that I had to pay each term for, and everything else. Nothing else at all would have featured into that equation, but I certainly knew people who were even worse off than I was in that situation. And so if I wanted to go see a GP, I'd either have to do so in the UK, which actually I didn't want to do because it wasn't my GP. My GP was based in Jersey. That's the one who I wanted to see. And if I came back, I'd probably go cap in hand to my parents, which is exactly the situation we want to avoid, because frankly, it's an embarrassing thing to have to do. So I completely agree with the way that Deputy Ward referred to the situation in the UK. That is the mess you get when you have underinvestment in health services, which for at least 13 years in the UK has been ideologically driven, and we can see what an absolute mess it is. Getting queues for seeing a GP in the UK is down to funding priorities. It's not down to the principle that anybody ought to be able to see a GP when they need it. And I know of instances in the UK, particularly in towns outside of London, where I had friends who actually got to see a GP very quickly when they needed it, because they would just happen to be lucky enough to be based somewhere where the local authorities had made particular decisions on funding for health access. And so the queues weren't so bad there and could go very quickly. It's all a question of priorities. Deputy Taylor, of course, was totally right that it is a non sequitur here, and the Deputy Ferry pointing out that their stats say that students only go to see a GP slightly more than once a year. So what's the problem then? It's going to be cheap to do it, but that once a year might, when it comes to it, be very important for that student. There are all sorts of health things that we can be affected by, even in our younger years, when you might otherwise assume would be a healthiest time for us. So this is the direction of travel. The Health Minister spoke about the wider work they're doing on health funding and the way they wanted to engage with students. So, are you going to engage with students, and are they going to say, no, keep charging us to see a GP? Of course they're not. They're going to say the precise opposite. We can presume that without having that conversation with them, and this will be the direction of travel. So we can either do what we did last year, which was to ignore the advice given to us by the government and vote to go ahead with expanding a scheme that provides free access to primary care for a wider group of people. It was a resounding success last time it was done. It will be a resounding success if we do it again. So rather than prevaricate and defer to some future review or future consultation, which is an oh-so-easy thing to do, I hope members will support this amendment from Deputy Alves, and I bet you none of us will regret it afterwards, because we didn't the last time we did that.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak on... Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. I fully appreciate, and so does the Council of Ministers, that on the face of it, this seems like a very simple, low-cost and good initiative to support. But if we consider the words of the Constable of St John in the previous debate, we do actually have to watch our pennies. There's absolutely no doubt that it was the right thing to do to fund the under-16s in their attendance at GP surgeries, and that is making a big difference. It is true, sir. But what we have to do now is exercise some discipline, because this will not stop. And where do we stop? We are in the second year of this government and our spending plans, and as the Health Minister has set out, we are in a process of redefining how we pay for our healthcare services and how we put right the legacy that we have taken on, the uncontrolled spending of the previous Health Minister and the people running that service. That is being put right through the investment of this government, through the good work of the turnaround team, and we are seeing change. Just this morning, you could hear on the radio, apologies, sir, members and the public would have heard on the radio the change that is being delivered in terms of the reduction of waiting times for scans. Absolutely vital work that is being done and delivered by the careful investment of this government. This is about priorities. This is about focusing on what is absolutely necessary, and it is about focusing on writing the legacy that we have, finding a way forward and delivering sustainable budgets for the future, so that we can ensure that the young people, the students of today, have a strong and healthy future in the island, one where we can afford to ensure that they want to and are able to afford a good quality of life here, and an island and a community where everyone can thrive. Sir, this is like buses. We would all love to make our services free to all. But the problem would be, if we were to do that, we wouldn't be able to afford the service itself. I take the view somewhat that I would prefer to see more buses on the road. Absolutely. And therefore, in order to fund those, we do have to take the difficult steps sometimes and exercise some discipline, some restraint. And I ask members, as tempting as it might be, to please kindly vote against this amendment.
Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I will try and be brief, and I won't repeat the points that have been well made by my Reform Jersey colleagues about our principles about free access to primary health care. However, I did want to address some of the claims made by ministers and some of the arguments, because it seems rather strange to me that only this morning and yesterday afternoon we were having a debate whereby ministers were telling us effectively that increasing the price of alcohol would limit the amount of alcohol people might consume and change behaviours. And yet they are now saying that the cost of a GP visit is not going to stop people from going and seeing the GP. Seems to me rather a duplicitous argument around cost. We've also heard from ministers today that this particular amendment is not well targeted because it's not means tested. And yet yesterday ministers argued to retain hundreds and thousands of pounds of uncontrolled spending on means-tested tax reliefs. Again, a duplicitous argument. And my other point that I wanted to make, because I did promise I'd keep this brief, was, and it only came to me as Deputy Mezek was speaking about his student experience, is if you're sat in this chamber today thinking about your own experience as a student, think again about how different that is likely to be to the students for today. Because if your student experience, and I'm sure many of you will have been of the age, as am I, whereby we got fully funded degrees together with a fully funded maintenance grant, that is not the experience of students today. And that is exactly what puts students today at the risk of vulnerability, at the risk of having to go and ask their parent for money if they might want to go and see a GP for something that's private and personal, and potentially something they don't want to discuss with their parents. Because as the Social Security Minister quite rightly said, at that age, they are an adult, they are forging their own independent life, but we're not giving them the means through grants and maintenance funding that previously students had to have that independence. So I urge you to support the Deputy's amendment today and support further access to free GP visits for more people on the island.
Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And I have no intention to speak on this, and I'm sure we'll keep hearing that during these debates. I just want to re-highlight the ability for us through these debates to find nuance and actually find better positions and better points of view. In hearing Deputy Alves' opening remarks, she highlighted a challenge with the kind of the knife edge that we see with the under-18 scheme, which I think has been said should be commended and is working well. And that is those in higher education, in essence a year 13 course, potentially in something in Highlands similar, hitting a period where their peers are not affected. Now I think there's a great case for hearing that argument and reflecting. I think that argument, however, is not the same argument as one to promote free GPs for all full-time students. So I think it is possible to take something, regardless of how this goes, out of the debate and actually hear those valid arguments whilst reflecting on arguments about those who make life choices to enter full-time education. And I highlighted around the Council of Ministers table my concern actually sometimes with our approach to supporting and promoting kind of the be-all and end-all of full-time education whilst not reflecting enough on how many careers require part-time education, many apprenticeships have part-time education and ultimately sometimes don't lead to careers with such high-paying jobs. So I would ask members to reflect on the choices people will make, reflect on the good stories we're hearing out of these debates and maybe where changes will be made, but also the case is made that actually a full-time student can be an incredibly broad category, and it can be people who make that decision under their decision to improve their employment prospect or to educate themselves for reasons, and we need to be careful with that definition, notwithstanding perhaps lessons to be learnt on expanding the scheme brought previously.
Deputy Farnham.
I remember a former greffier, some greffiers back, asking them what did they dread hearing from members. and they dreaded the word. They said, "Oh, I dread the words hearing a member stands up and says I wasn't going to speak, but I was always going to speak on this, albeit briefly." I can't actually believe how an argument can be made against this now, and I think my time in the States has been a rather extreme learning experience, and we all continue to learn. And a number of years ago, perhaps I wouldn't have supported this. I perhaps wouldn't have supported free buses. I probably wouldn't have supported free GP visits for children. But having seen it and seen the benefits it brings and seen the confidence it restores in this assembly from islanders and from children and from students and from those who benefit, whatever their background, whatever their financial position, has been a revelation as far as I'm concerned. And I know the pressures on GP surgeries are probably more about the availability of health staff and doctors and GPs and some of those issues as opposed to increase in numbers using them. I'm not sure. I know the figures. I've been very lucky, so I've been with the same surgery all of my life, as were my parents and my grandparents and even my great-grandparents. And I always managed to get an appointment very quickly. And if people don't, I'm quite happy to share the name. Well, no, maybe I'm not happy to share the name of my surgery, sir. But I still believe we have very, very good, in fact, excellent primary care over here. And the Health Minister said this is about improving access to primary care. And this will improve access to primary care for full-time students. How better can you improve access to primary care than to making it free to those people who I think would benefit from it, i.e. full-time students. And of course, we often nod through or don't debate properly things that are going to cost us hundreds of thousands or even millions or tens of millions. Those can go through on a nod, but here we are, £75,000 in the scheme of things. What are we doing? Let's support this. Let's give full-time students free access to primary care, sir, and let's move on. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Connie Tarbison, John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, in the previous debate, I spoke about the need for prudence. Sir, I was really happy to support the proposal for free healthcare for youngsters, and I'm happy to support this amendment, sir. Sir, the money, £75,000, sir, is easy to find. I'll give you an example, sir. In June 2023, we approved P19. That had a budget for £14,400 per month for an interim chair. We spent £21,060 per month for the first 10 months. Sir, that's how you save money. You live by your budgets, you stick to your budgets, and let's get on with it. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak on the amendment, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Alves to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I thank everyone for their contributions, especially those who spoke in favour, and my Reform Jersey colleagues who have probably left me very little to cover in the summing up. So I think one of the issues here was around what is the cut-off point. Some people mentioned part-time students, and I think I would have loved to have been able to bring it forward for everybody, for every student and apprentice. However, I think we have to learn to prioritise, like I think the Chief Minister mentioned, and for me, and as Deputy Ward said and highlighted, full-time students are those that are not working. You know, they're in full-time education and therefore do not have the same disposable income. I think it was the Minister of Social Security who mentioned we don't know who they are. How are GPs going to know who the students are? Well, so I think that raises another issue. I think that raises the issue around the lack of decent data collection in government. And actually, I think that's something the Minister shouldn't be happy to admit. So And also, I think there's something called a student card, which I think most full-time students carry. It also offers them access to discounts, so maybe that would be a way. But anyway, let's move on from that. I found the use of the word adults quite convenient in some of the contributions from government, especially when, according to some of the laws that are currently in place, you are still seen as a dependent until you are 25. Full-time students are full-time students, sir. It doesn't matter what age they are. And actually, the number of students who are older is, when I say older, a lot older, I suppose, is negligible. And if one of the very few things that we can, that they can gain from being a full-time student is a free GP visit, then is that really that bad? At the end of the day, they will be contributing their skills back to the economy. They don't have the time to earn as much as somebody who is working full-time. So surely this is a way to support their learning and actually to encourage people to further their education. Also, adult full-time students are probably more likely to come back. I think we've already heard today that a lot of students are saying they won't be coming back, and actually adult students are more likely to come back because they have established those family links here. So we've heard a couple of people's personal stories, and I'm going to share my personal story. I actually went to university later on as an adult. I was at university when I was 23, and I think the Social Security Minister mentioned the age 23. And by that time, like Deputy Feltham mentioned, I had to pay for my university fees. Unfortunately, I was also diagnosed with cancerous cervical cells, and I developed an autoimmune disease around the same time. Both these conditions needed regular monitoring and regular blood work and GP visits. Now, I could have visited the GP in the UK for free, and actually I did on occasion when I needed to get certain prescriptions, if I had flare-ups, etc. But like Deputy Farnham mentioned, I obviously prefer to be monitored by my GP, the GP that had known me since I was practically born, and I felt comfortable with. Now, fortunately, I had a very understanding GP who didn't charge me all the time, sir, because I can guarantee you now, if I had to cover the costs of those appointments and choose between eating and going to a GP visit, I would have probably prioritised eating, and I probably wouldn't be here today. And that's the reality. So I think I've made it quite clear that this amendment seeks to address some obvious inequalities that exist. I'm not going to repeat them, sir. I think it's quite obvious. I think the nuanced arguments against are just invalid, and I think ultimately, sir, it's up to members to make that decision on what they can carry in their conscience. So, sir, I urge members to think very carefully and to support this amendment. I maintain the amendment and ask for the appel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I beg your pardon. The vote is on the 18th Amendment. Members have returned to their seats. Then I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 24 votes pour, 20 votes contre, no abstentions.
We have the whole vote read out.
Pour and contre. Both, yes.
Those members voting for the Connaught Harbour, St Martin, St John, St Clement, Groove Hill, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Tadier, Lehegra, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Porray, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Howe, Kovac, Barbara Ward, Andrews and Dublé. And those members voting contre. the Conatava, St Helier, St Brillard and St Peter, and deputies Labby, Luce, Morell, Ayer, Gorst, Moore, Osoph, Balish, Moore, Miles, Renouf, Rose Binet, Miller, Berry, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Tom Binet.
Very well. The next matter before the Assembly is the 33rd Amendment brought by the Council of Ministers. I ask the referee to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph F. After paragraph F, insert the following new paragraph and redesignate the subsequent paragraphs accordingly. G. To approve a transfer from the Consolidated Fund to the Agricultural Loans Fund in 2024 of up to £10 million, subject to a decision by the Minister for Treasury and Resources based on availability of funds in the Consolidated Fund as at the 31st of December 2023 in excess of estimates provided in this plan, or from budgeted underspends identified before the 31st of December 2024. Page 2, paragraph H. After the words "of the report," insert the words, "except that, in Summary Table 5.1, the head of expenditure for economic development, tourism, sport and culture should be increased by £2 million, with decreases to the following heads of expenditure. 1. Cabinet Office, £1 million. 2. Customer and Local Services, £22,000. 3. Children and Young People, Education and Skills, £286,000. 4. Infrastructure, £74,000. 5. Environment, £18,000. 6. Health and Community Services, £415,000. 7. Justice and Home Affairs, £60,000. 8. States of Jersey Police, £47,000. 9. Financial Services, £13,000. 10. Ministry of External Relations, £5,000. And 11. Treasury and Exchequer, £60,000.
Chief Minister, or...
So I think the rapporteur on this is the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development.
Minister, or are you expecting
I'm afraid, sir, it's not me.
Right. Is anyone from the Council of Minister going to propose this amendment?
So I'll do it if you want.
Minister.
Looks like it's me, sir.
Yes.
This is, of course, is a straightforward amendment arising out of a decision that the states made earlier this year, merely some weeks ago. I was clear in that debate and that I supported, as did other ministers, based on what would be a difficult process to allocate the required funding across budgets. That's what's proposed. And that will therefore provide the funding to agriculture and fisheries as instructed by the Assembly in their vote some weeks ago. So I know there is an amendment to fund it from via a different process, which ministers don't support for all understandable reasons. I think that the Sustainable Economic Development Minister is taking his more than reasonable share from his budget to help fund this priority that he has in his department, and that the members of the Assembly supported on the back of Deputy Luce's proposition, as is the Cabinet Office, which is why ministers have sought to object to some of the other reductions in that department. So I maintain or propose the amendment to the Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. Is the amendment seconded? Very well, there is now an amendment to the amendment, and I ask the referee to read the amendment to the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph 1. Before paragraph 1, insert a new paragraph as follows and redesignate the subsequent paragraphs accordingly. Page 2, paragraph E. After the words "in line with Article 9.2b of the law," insert the words, "except that within Summary Table 3, the transfer from the Strategic Reserve to the Consolidated Fund should be increased by £3 million for 2024, with its funding of £3 million for subsequent years to be identified for an alternative sustainable funding source." Page 2, paragraph 2. Substitute the words "following increased by" with the words £3 million.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, sir. Based on track record alone, I kind of would prefer it was Deputy Alves or even Deputy Balash making this amendment instead of me. So the purpose of this amendment is to enable us to enact the decision which we made by adopting P74 to provide that extra support for agriculture and fisheries, something that I'm sure all of us know is so desperately needed and that we all wish to support, but proposes doing so in a different way to that which is proposed by the Council of Ministers, which is for them to add on £3 million of completely unsubstantiated cuts across the board to government departments, and instead, sir, for 1 year, take that from the strategic reserve and require the government to come up with a sustaining funding proposal in future years for this. So the Treasury Minister just reminded us in his speech that he had raised the prospect of further cuts in order to fund the consequences of P74. But let's be clear, that was not in the wording of the proposition that was agreed by the Assembly. It was merely in the report. So it was not to the letter of what we agreed as an Assembly, and in the time after the success of that proposition, the government, of course, would have had an opportunity to come up with other funding mechanisms if they so chose. So the Value for Money programme, which in the this previous year of the government plan and for the next few years projected, is to provide £10 million of savings across government departments, and it's of course a very cleverly titled Value for Money programme rather than the Cuts programme, because there won't be a single one of us who will object to government seeking good value for money. Of course not. We all want whatever services or work the government is providing or doing to be funded with the best value for money possible. We don't want things to be more expensive than they necessarily have to be. But that programme has come under the microscope because of the recommendations now made not just once but twice by the Fiscal Policy Panel that government plans should not include reference to speculative savings. That is for obviously good reasons, which is that if you tie yourself to savings which are speculative and unsubstantiated, if they turn out to not be deliverable, that then puts huge pressures on other parts of your budget, which could lead to even more difficult decisions and potentially cuts to services that don't fit the definition of value for money if they're not delivered. So it is the case, and the government will, I'm sure, do their absolute best to find a form of words to get out of admitting this, but they are proposing cuts, value for money savings in, was that Freudian slip there, value for money savings in future years, which are speculative because they cannot tell us where those savings are coming from. Instead, they say, we've got a budget of £1 billion a year, of course 10 million is achievable. But that is the politics of I reckon. Yeah, I reckon we could make 10 million. It's not an evidence or substantiated process to tell us, and this is precisely where we'll get those savings from. You know, and there are plenty of areas where they might be able to reasonably find savings. They might be able to procure a particular resource at a cheaper value from another distributor. You know, who would disagree with government wanting to do that to get better value for money? And if they can tell us where they think they could achieve that, they'll find very little resistance on that front. But instead, they propose in future years simply a line that says £10 million value for money savings without even telling us what government departments that's coming from. It's only in the year of the government plan that we're approving that they tell us exactly how much each department will be expected to save. And even beyond then, there are not anywhere near adequate enough reporting standards on that so we can have confidence that the savings are realistic and deliverable, which is why, completely separate to this amendment, there is a scrutiny amendment to try to impose better reporting standards on the Value for Money programme, which the government itself has amended to find a different way of doing it, because at least they accept the principle that that's an important thing to do. But Sir, contentious as it is already to have a £10 million target for Value for Money savings, now the government's 33rd amendment seeks for us to increase that by 30%, and in their reports to that amendment, they offer us one single sentence in it to substantiate it. One single sentence, which says, this is to be funded through an increase in the cashable savings allocations through the Value for Money programme, with each departmental head of expenditure being reduced accordingly. That's it. That's how they offer us £3 million in extra savings, nothing more than that one single sentence in order to do that. I certainly don't feel that that is good enough, and I think it runs a serious risk of potentially well-intentioned value for money targets ending up becoming cuts to public services and putting pressure in other areas that may turn out to be unpalatable to us. So because they haven't come up with that funding mechanism for this year, other than an extremely unimaginative, let's just whack on that to the Value for Money programme without seemingly doing any other further work that they can substantiate to prove that it's viable. Instead, Sir, this amendment seeks to propose that for 1 year we will fund it by using the strategic reserve. I actually don't like being in a situation to propose that. I don't think the strategic reserve ought to be a pot that we just dip into for whatever purposes. We have to have good reasons for it. We've already made a decision once today to do that for very good reasons, as this Assembly clearly decided. But one of the purposes of the strategic reserve, as the government says in its own comments, it says it's to insulate the island's economy from severe structural decline. It then goes on to say it's not the proper funding source to dip into to fund ongoing government expenditure. But what if that government expenditure is to insulate the island's economy from severe structural decline, which is exactly what this is about. It's to recognise what we have already been convinced of, which is the extreme difficulties that agriculture and fisheries have been facing and the need for greater government support for them, which if we don't do, could end up risking the viability of those industries and many of the businesses that are working in them because of all the other pressures that they're facing, something that would be devastating for Jersey, given how important, not just economically, but through our heritage and the management of our land, one of our most precious resources here, that industry provides for us. So I think we can say that a one-off dip into that reserve to prevent completely unsubstantiated and potentially dangerous cuts to public services can be done once. I will say, sir, it sticks in the teeth when in the government's comments they say there is no magic money tree and there are hard financial choices to make. Hard choices like giving, again, completely unsubstantiated tax cuts to people with homes with no mortgage on to rent out rooms with no evidence whatsoever that that's a good use of losing, a good purpose for losing revenue there. An IT budget, which seems to go up year on year to extortionate amounts, but there always seems to be a magic money tree for that. But sir, if I can indulge the Assembly by saying at least for this specific proposition, which would see £3 million taken out of the strategic reserve, I can tell you a way that you can deal with this very easily in a sustainable way, and that is to adopt a later amendment to this government plan to reform our income tax system, which raises enough revenue to provide the ongoing funding mechanism for this and pay back the 3 million into the strategic reserve with money to spare over at the end of it. So in this debate, I won't take any lectures from anyone who wants to argue about magic money trees, because in the grand scheme of things, we are able to provide a sustainable funding mechanism for this that doesn't end up seeing overall less into the strategic reserve. I mean, that will be a separate debate, and it'll be down to members to decide whether they agree with that principle, but we're certainly wholly behind that, not just because it's a good policy, but because it's democratically what we promised the public we would do. So, Sarah, I ask members to consider this amendment as an alternative way of funding that support for agriculture and fisheries, which we know is so desperately needed, but to avoid giving their backing to a further £3 million in cuts, because at this point we can only presume that's what they will be. If they aren't to be cuts, I'm sure the government would have presented the evidence to prove that to us, and we'd all be a lot more relaxed about it, to avoid having that risk, and instead coming back next year with a sustainable funding proposal that we can all be much more comfortable with. And so I make the amendment, sir.
Is the amendment seconded? Any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Gorst.
Thank you, sir. The position between the government and the mover of this proposition, to me, is quite clear, and I will leave other members to talk about the agriculture and fishing industry if they so wish. I think we've had a debate on that, and the decision was virtually, if it's possible to be virtually unanimous. No one voted against, let's put it like that. And therefore that need is presented. But here we have a clear choice. And that choice is, do we seek to allocate our funding, reminding ourselves that this government plan is proposing 1.2 billion of funding. Do we seek to reallocate our funding, seek to deliver services efficiently? And I've enjoyed conversations with the chair of the scrutiny panel, who's now the rapporteur for his amendment, around whether it is possible with a budget of £1.2 billion to make general efficiencies right across government to the tune of 10 million per year. The government fundamentally believes that it is, and it believes that this 3 million additional pounds, the difference is the 1 million is the effects on the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development's budget, can also be added to that efficiencies value for money target. And that is how I believe members of the public would expect us to deliver this proposal, to reallocate from within existing budgets. Rather unfairly, in large part, Cabinet Office have been criticised time and time again. They're an easy target for all sorts of reasons. But ministers are proposing here that that budget will be reduced, as well as the other reductions, by £1 million in order to reprioritise to spend money on agriculture and fisheries, and I think that is the right thing. The arguments that we've had at the scrutiny panel hearing is really around what the FPP have said about unstructured budget reductions, and whether it is right that we go into the ins and outs of every pound, or we simply say to departments, you manage and provide your services within that overall target. I believe that that is the right approach. Scrutiny panel, I think, believes in a different approach. And that's not a problem. This is where political differences can be and should be argued over and should be debated over, and that we should vote on. Do we want to seek to ensure that we are always delivering efficiently and always seeking to deliver value for money, and whilst giving departments growth monies, still expecting them to drive out efficiencies in their budgets? I believe we should. We heard, of course, from the move of the proposition that really, in large part, a different view. And his concern is that the reductions in bottom line budgets could leave, or is masquerading as could lead to cuts in services. I think it is right that departments and ministers and chief officers prioritise their spend. Prioritise the spend to what can actually be delivered in year, rather than just always seeking for a greater forecasted budget and then not spending it at the end. Being careful to make sure there isn't duplication. But as we heard the move of the proposition say, he's quite happy to bring forward tax changes that will raise more tax in order to replenish the strategic reserve, and I'll come on to the strategic reserve point in due course. That is a perfectly legitimate political choice. Perfectly legitimate political choice. It's not one that I wish to make. It's not one that I wish to promote, and it's not one which I wish to propose to the Assembly this afternoon. But in the short term, sir, it cannot be right that we use monies in the strategic reserve for everyday revenue expenditure. Yesterday, in the Royal Square, I was asked, why don't we follow the United Kingdom on a matter? Why don't we do what the United Kingdom does in regard to its budget? And I was quite clear. It's okay for us to say, well, we'll do A, B, C and D that they do, but let us be clear. Other jurisdictions run their revenue expenditure via borrowing. We don't do that, sir, nor do we borrow or take money from our strategic reserve to deliver revenue expenditure. It would be wholly inappropriate for us to do so. It would be cavalier with our future and the stability of public finances, and therefore the stability of the economy. I cannot, sir, support this proposal that says revenue expenditure, even if it's only for 1 year, which is a sweetener, from the strategic reserve. We live in most uncertain times. We do have a firm foundation, and we discussed earlier about buoying up our 2 billion pension pot. And members said, actually, no, they want to put another 20 million a year next year and the year after into a 2 billion pension pot. Here we have a £1 billion strategic reserve for those catastrophic economic issues that we know other places are facing, and we know that the turmoil around us is not going away. We know also, sir, that some other small places like us, over the last number of years, have dipped into their reserves for revenue expenditure, initially, just for 1 year, sir. Initially, just for 1 year. They will deal with it later. And right now, they are running deficits for their everyday expenditure, and they are drawing down on their reserves. When I speak to their ministers or senior politicians, they are really concerned about the future of their public finances. Now, we heard the Constable of St John chastise me. I don't mind being chastised in the terms that the Constable of John chastised me earlier. He said that I should be more robust with political colleagues when it comes to their spending aspirations. My only disappointment, sir, is that he's no longer around that table to be encouraging me and saying, come on, Treasury Minister, be firmer. Just say no with them. That's my only disappointment. I hope, though, sir, he carries on from the backbenches doing that. And this, to me, sir, is absolutely something that we really should not be doing. I am prepared to work with ministers throughout the course of this year, as I always do. But we absolutely cannot start on that step of saying, let's not worry, sir, it's only 1 year, it's only £3 million from our strategic rainy day reserve. We cannot do it, I cannot support it, and I ask members not to support it either. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Walsh. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? No other member, Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. These new cuts proposed in Amendment 33 come on top of large planned value for money savings and some department budgets which appear to be already cut or at least very tight. I'm not sure if States members have noticed how tight some of these budgets are. I questioned Deputy Gorse by email recently over my concerns that department budgets look to being cut in real terms. This goes against the government's own financial principles, number 2.2, and I quote, departmental base budgets should be maintained in real terms except where changes and services or efficiencies have been identified and agreed. I didn't get a reply, so the States Gref contacted Treasury on my behalf, and I then received an answer. What concerned me in their answer was that their inflation figure for working out department budgets for the year ahead is 3.8%. This information is also on page 51 of the government plan, but I was hoping for a bit more of an explanation. Page 51 of the government plan does also state there remains a significant amount of uncertainty around levels of inflation. Also, pay inflation is held centrally to be allocated out in the year. Still, 3.8%. Over the 12 months to September 23, the Jersey RPI was 10.1%. Of course, inflation is expected to fall in 2024, but is 3.8% too optimistic. The estimated UK RPI figure is 5.1% for 2024. This leaves department budgets vulnerable to being insufficient, especially considering the much higher value for money savings being imposed this year. On top of all this, the cuts proposed by the government in this amendment include a cut of £47,000 to the police budget. Now, nearly all the police budget is staffing. So if this is voted through, will we be cutting a police officer post? The cuts proposed for the Children, Young People, Education and Skills budget is £286,000. Will this mean fewer social workers, so vulnerable children left without the right protection? Will it mean less resource for inclusion in schools, so no one to give the extra care needed by small children with a record of need? Will it mean school pupils not having textbooks they need? The answer is we don't know. These cuts are potentially really dangerous and should not be supported. And let's keep this in perspective. The amendment is asking for the funding to come as a one-off this year from the strategic reserve. That is much better than cuts to essential services. The responsible vote of States members would be to support the amendment to the amendment, thereby avoiding these dangerous cuts to essential services.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Renouf.
Yes, sir, thank you. Just to make a couple of points, because I do think there were some comments made in Deputy Mesick's speech which I think were quite revealing and not in a good way. I think we are on a very slippery slope, potentially, with this amendment. It shows to me a lack of respect for the strategic reserve and its purposes. Deputy Mezek declared that the crisis in farming and fishing is a sufficient trigger to meet the definition of severe structural decline, which is how we measure interventions that are justified to intervene using the strategic reserve. I have to say no, no, no. It is no disrespect to the very genuine needs of both sectors, farming and fishing, to say that their current situation in no way meets the definition of severe structural decline that is explicit in the strategic reserve. The strategic reserve, as is very clear, is for situations such as the collapse of the finance industry or major natural disaster or a collapse of a bank. This betrays I think this amendment, betrays a misunderstanding of what the strategic reserve is for, and we would be on a very slippery slope indeed if we started dipping in for £3 million here, a few £million there. The issues that we have in farming and fishing are significant, but they are not existential for the survival of the island's economy. If we were to go down this route, then we would soon be asked to do the same for other sectors of the economy, hospitality, tourism, and so on. These are all worthwhile sectors to consider support for, but not from the strategic reserve. So I say that we should stick to what the government has suggested here. Still painful, but we can, I think, with the Treasury Minister's help, achieve it. We should hesitate for an eternity, I think the phrase was once used in UK politics. Hesitate for an eternity before we go down the route of using the strategic reserve for a £3 million piece of current expenditure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? If Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And the thing I think interests me about this particular debate, apart from the fact that obviously, if Deputy Mezek's amendment to the amendment is successful, then the budget for the Department for the Economy will be greatly relieved. So in that sense, you sit up and say, surely Deputy Morell wants this to go ahead. But the thing that really makes me reflect is the debate we've just had about the Social Security Fund. And this strikes me as having a lot of parallels with that. Quite understandably, people who were in favour of Deputy Balash's proposition or proposed amendment were saying the Social Security Fund is for these purposes. I listened to Deputy Balash quite clearly say that. In that case, it was pensioners' money and therefore hands off. And I get that, there's logic there. And this is a really similar debate. It's saying the strategic reserve is there for specific purposes, which I won't go through again, but Deputy Renner just outlined them really well. And as a result of that, if you were thinking the Social Security Fund is there for a particular purpose, then the strategic reserve is also there for a particular purpose. It is not there for current revenue spending. As much as Deputy Mezek's amendment, helps my budget. And so for that reason, I do think members should sit there and think, no, we do have to have a level of discipline about ourselves when it comes to matters around money. Again, that's what Deputy Balash was arguing, in my view, around the Social Security Fund. And it stands as well for the strategic reserve, because it is true that there are governments where you see it just chip away, you just slowly eat away, slice away at the strategic reserve. It's always the big boss. I've wanted to do it as a States member. I've probably lodged a proposition at some point to say, let's use the strategic reserve for X or Y, and been pushed back and said, no, that is there. It is the rainy day fund. It is the insurance policy for kind of catastrophic events within the island. And so, sir, as much as there are benefits in Deputy Mezek's proposition or amendment to the amendment for my department, I have to say, no, this is especially reflecting on the Social Security Fund debate that we have just had. We need to maintain that level of discipline, and therefore we should, as an assembly, reject the amendment to the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Is there any of them? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's interesting that we've got the slippery slope argument again. We see that a lot. Let me put this point to you when we're talking about the Social Security Fund as a specific aim. Yes. So do department funds. Department funds allocated in a government plan have a specific aim to run departments, and they are allocated, and we are told that the government plan has been thought about very carefully, money's been allocated appropriately. We've been told this a number of times. But now, all of a sudden, very, very rapidly, in what I think is a rather knee-jerk response to an amendment, to a proposition brought, within which we recognised a desperate need for an industry on the island, and no, it wasn't finance. And it's interesting that the Environment Minister talks about finance first. It was another industry, one of the diverse industries on our islands, fishing and agriculture, something that's become increasingly important in the future. The debate we had before about food security, about an industry that's been here a long time, that has tradition, that is struggling. And so the money has to be allocated. But what we've said is that actually department budgets aren't for departments. We can just take from them. We can make salami sliced cuts. And this is the problem. We are salami slicing. They are not targeted. They're not there. And Deputy Catherine raised a very good point about the aims of the government plan to fund appropriately. And then suddenly we can slice pieces off of that whenever we fancy, or when the government fancies. Whereas what we've got is an intelligent, thought about amendment to this amendment that says, because we've identified this as effectively an emergency process for agriculture and fishery, and this assembly very recently, and yes, perhaps it should have been done earlier to give the government more time in the government plan to work out where this money would come from, then we need to allocate money for next year. This is just for 1 year. And after that, that may well give just the lift that is needed for an industry to survive and to build. And if it does survive and it does build, it will return money to our economy. And if it does that, that is a good investment in an economic section of our economy, part of our economy, which, if we lose into the future, will have a significant impact to the nature of this island. We agreed that last time. And I think it's... I don't want to use I don't know what is the best word to use, sir. I think this is, I used knee-jerk reaction. I think that might be the politest way to put it in terms of where this money's coming from. And it does sound like, back of a fag packet sort of stuff. So, okay, where can we get £3 million from? Well, I tell you what, we can do this, and we can, a bit of education, £286,000, Home Affairs, 47,000, 5,000 from external relations. There you go. Kushti, we use that word again, so I hope that is a word we can use in this assembly. Sorted. Right, bring it to the assembly. They'll nod it through, and because I've had to vote for it, and we can use that argument. You voted for it. Now, not vote through the cuts that come with it. There you go. That's the consequence of you voting to support an industry here. Now you've got to vote for the cuts. However, there are many amongst us who will look at that and say, no, hold on a second. That is not the way to do it. And that is not a sustainable way. That is your slippery slope. That if we ever have to react to a section of our economy, we cut essential services or frontline services in order to do it. That is an unpleasant slippery slope which we do not want to go down. Now, this is a particular issue at the time. And I think the issue around this is this amendment has got more support than a normal amendment where we talk about the rainy day fund would have. Because there is that principle for many here. We won't touch the rainy day fund, full stop. Won't even consider it, whatever it is. But in this case, I think we're starting to see across this assembly that the impact of these cuts and changes could be absolutely significant to so many different departments. And so, sir, I would urge members to think very, very carefully about whether we want to make those salami slice cuts across the department to support an industry on one hand, and whether that is the best use of a strategic reserve, which is high, interest rates are high, we're getting money in, we're doing well with it, This is the time to make that one-off investment so that we can actually make that change, rather than going down the slippery slope of either abandoning an industry if we can't find a funding mechanism, or abandoning parts of our services and different departments because you simply want to make cuts to them which have not been thought about and not been detailed in any way. I urge members to support this proposition, this amendment to the amendment, so that the main amendment can be acted upon, as we've all agreed on, in the most appropriate way with the least impact elsewhere, and we can move forward. Thank you.
Well, Deputy Scott.
So I find it strange that the bringer of the proposition is bringing this, because he does have an important role as chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I do understand he's not bringing it in that capacity, but I do expect him as president of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee to value scrutiny. And I have, and I hope all States members have read the report of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I will refer to key finding 5. Sorry, not key 15, I believe. 16. So that basically is a finding that the reserves, Stabilisation Fund and the Strategic Reserve Fund, are not at sufficient levels, despite the current and recent past strength of the government revenues. And then recommendation 25. Now, what does that say? Oh yes. The Council of Ministers must strengthen its commitment to prioritise the transfer of future surpluses to the Stabilisation Fund and Strategic Reserve, to rebuild the funds to appropriate levels, and should observe the advice of the Fiscal Policy Panel. A short-term renewed policy action plan must be developed to replenish the Stabilisation Fund and Strategic Reserve, and this must be addressed within the next government plan. All prior year basis receipts must be ring-fenced and transferred to the Strategic Reserve as they arise. Sir, who should I be listening to? What should I be following? What advice? I very much respect the work of my colleagues in scrutiny, and indeed the work of the Corporate Scrutiny Panel in terms of thinking about the economy, as does my panel. At least that's its role. So I guess this really underscores some of the kind of difficulties in terms of having an ideological position on one hand as a States member and having a role in scrutiny and being the same member. I very much respect the scrutiny process. I know that there are members who think it's a waste of time, it's meaningless, but I frankly think if that is the case, don't have scrutiny. We can come up with some other thing, but that's really my position. I will respect the recommendation of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, and I'm sure the chair in that capacity would suggest the same.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Messick to respond.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Scott may feel like she got a gotcha moment there by quoting the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel's report, words and findings and recommendations, which of course I completely stand by. But I do think I made the appropriate point in my opening remarks on this, where I proactively offered a solution which would be able to see more money going into the strategic reserve at the end of it. So I'm taking a position that I think is entirely consistent, so there's no gotcha there. Sir, Deputy Gorst spoke about the Value for Money programme and said that there were political differences, and he's completely wrong. There are no political differences on the principles of the Value for Money programme. I have a great many political differences with Deputy Gorst as a person, but on the principles of the Value for Money programme, there are no political differences at all, because I too want to see government departments delivering the best value for money that they possibly can from taxpayers' money and providing services efficiently. And if there are instances where money is either being wasted or there are alternative opportunities to deliver those services at a more efficient cost, then I would want to snap those opportunities up immediately. And if he wants to present any clear examples of where that can be done safely without risking public services, he'll have my wholehearted support on it. Getting good value for money is not a left or right kind of political difference. We all support that in principle. The difference, sir, is not political, it's personal, because you can have personal traits irrespective of what your politics are, to do with how risk-averse you might be, to be how data-driven you may be. And I think that's where the difference comes here. It's not political, it's that, for whatever reasons, the Treasury Minister is content to sign up to a figure of a target for savings without the substantiation that others might prefer to see those as genuinely achievable. He's prepared to sign up to it on the basis that he reckons it's deliverable. I'm only prepared to sign up to it on the basis that it can be substantiated that it's deliverable. So that's not a political difference, that is a personal difference. But also, sir, when it comes to the amendment to remove from the government plan an extra table that provides for £3 million of extra savings across different government departments, that actually doesn't stop any of those departments from continuing to aspire to make value for money savings. They're still allowed to try to do it. They're just not forced to do it, even in the event that they can't do it. So if, sir, despite no effort whatsoever to demonstrate this to states members, but there is some grand plan behind this table and the breakdown that it has for us of how much can apparently be saved from government departments, if there is a grand plan that can prove that all of this is deliverable safely and without risking pressure on departments to cut, they can still actually go ahead with this. And when they make those savings, it can become underspends, and they can put that in the strategic reserve if they want to. He's got the power to do that. So, sir, if these are real, then my amendment causes no harm whatsoever. And it shows that they can replenish the strategic reserve if they're true to their word and these £3 million are doable. But it won't force government departments to make cuts because they've been told by a decision of the States Assembly that they must do so, even if those savings turn out to be unrealistic. And the fallback position then, sir, is that we have the opportunity to use the strategic reserve to make the difference there. That is the situation that we can have. Sir, I wonder how many people who work in agriculture were listening to the speech from the Minister for Environment, who I suspect some of which would have felt despair listening to it as he talked down any suggestion of them being in an existential struggle. So the extra funding that we've agreed for agriculture is in large part to help them with the costs that they have faced by the move to the living wage. something which I've been pleased to be able to have discussions with them to understand the implications of that, and that is a large part of that. But it doesn't take into account some of the other unexpected pressures that we've only faced since, in fact, these amendments have been published, like the massive loss that the agricultural industry will have faced from not having access to an abattoir for a period of time recently. And we've all saw the headlines there about the costs that they will have taken from that, which will have caused many of them great difficulties. So we've also had the unexpected increase in freight costs as well that have just been announced. Again, not calculated into the figure that we have agreed for extra funding for agriculture and fisheries, and something that will increase their costs and make business more difficult for them to do as well. So they are facing a difficult circumstance beyond that they had simply faced from the wage going up year after year. And so on that basis, just reading the wording that the government has offered us about the purpose of the strategic reserve to insulate the island's economy from severe structural decline, I feel that it does meet that definition. Deputy Gorse repeatedly described it as just general revenue expenditure. It's not, it's clearly exceptional because of the nature of why it's come about and why we're having to debate it in this way. So this amendment provides that safety net. It allows the government to go ahead with those £3 million of savings if they are genuinely possible. They have the freedom then to take the money they save for that and put it in the strategic reserve if they're genuinely so concerned about money being taken out of it for this purpose. But it doesn't force government departments to make cuts if those savings turn out not to be realistic. And I do wish, sir, that then rather than trying to frankly guilt trip us over this, the government could have provided more clarity on their value for money programme and shown us how they can substantiate that those savings are genuine and achievable. Because if they did, nobody would have a problem, certainly not me, because I don't have a political difference with the Treasury Minister on the principle of that. I'm more than happy to support savings if they're genuine and don't affect frontline services. So, sir, from the points raised in the debate on this amendment to the amendment, I hope members have realised that those points made opposing it, I think, can easily be countered when you understand the nature of how underspends can be dealt with and the position that the agricultural industry and fisheries, for that matter too, is facing. And I hope members will accept this as an alternative way of being able to deal with that. And I hope we don't end up coming back here in a year's time having found that government departments have had to make cuts that are unpalatable to us because we inadvertently gave them the requirement to do so by voting for an amendment from the government which attempts to substantiate their savings targets with literally one sentence and nothing more than that. So I ask for the appel.
The amendment is maintained. The appel is asked for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the amendment to the 33rd Amendment. Members have returned to their seats. Then I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 13 votes pour, 35 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those members voting for the Conotab of Grouville, St Juan and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Padier, Rob Ward, Alves, Mesick, Coles, Porray, Catherine Curtis, Feltham and Kovach.
We now revert to the debate on the 33rd Amendment. Does any member wish to speak on the 33rd Amendment? Deputy Morel.
Sir, thank you. And I really just wanted to speak about, because I didn't have an opportunity to speak when we actually had the debate on Deputy Luce Luce's proposition and the government's amendment to that proposition, which ended up with the rural and marine economies allocated an extra £3 million, effectively to £6.7 million. So first of all, I do want to thank the Assembly for that decision, because as we've just heard, those two industries are in severely difficult situations, and that the funding that has been allocated is going to go a long way, and is already going a long way to helping them. Yesterday I was asked a question about areas where we have delivered, and I was a bit off form yesterday morning, and what I should have jumped up and said is, well, we've been delivering in the rural and marine economies for the last 2 years or so. We brought out the rural and the rural economic strategy first, followed by the marine economic strategy. We convened both a rural forum of people in the agriculture sector, and we convened the marine forum of people in the marine economy sector. And since then, we have been changing those sectors for the better, sir, with the work and in lockstep with people from those sectors. In the rural economy particularly, we have seen more farmers entering the industry, which is something that people don't appreciate. Because we have focused on smallholders, we now have more farmers actually entering the industry. They often tend to be younger farmers. So we are creating a new future for farming in Jersey, whilst dealing with the many commercial difficulties that the larger farmers are dealing with. Obviously, we also had to deal with the awful incident at Woodlands just a year or so ago. And our department has again not only helped, but helped practically and helped financially as well. So I think this Assembly should really be proud, and I hope therefore will support the Council of Ministers' amendment to the government plan effectively, because this Assembly voted on that just a few weeks ago. Because we should be proud of the fact that we are supporting the rural and marine economies in Jersey. We now have a marine support scheme for the first time, as I understand it, in the history of the island. We are now providing direct financial support to fishing businesses and in many different ways. But like the rural support scheme, that support is utterly linked to greater sustainability, better environmental operations in the way they operate, and helps them find new markets. One of the things we'll be doing in 2024 is absolutely focusing on taking Jersey's products to new markets. We have been overly focused on one market to the north, which again just provides a lack of resilience, because when that market declines, the whole thing declines as well. And so I'd be really pleased if any States member wishes to learn more about the work that we do for the rural and marine economies and the rural support scheme and the marine economy support scheme. I'd be really pleased. My officers would be delighted to take you through it and help you. I do remember one of the Connotabs a few months ago coming to speak with Connotaba Grouville, coming to speak with us just to learn as to what we're doing. And so that is an open invitation to all States members. But thank you for supporting the amendment to Deputy Luce's proposition a few weeks ago. And I really do urge you to support this Council Minister's amendment so that we can put that into action. Thank you.
I'd be helpful at this point if I asked if any other member is going to want to speak on this amendment. I won't call you in this order, it's just an indication because we're at the point of almost of the adjournment. I've only got one light indicated.
So I think there may be speakers, but I think we should move the adjournment.
Well, that's really why I was asking. I wasn't expecting to call people in the order they put their lights on, just to indicate if they're intending to speak. We have at least two people speaking, and of course there'll be the summing up as well. So is the adjournment proposed?
Yes, sir.
Yes, the adjournment is proposed. Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.